All right, I'm going to call this meeting to order. If we can rise and do the Pledge of Allegiance. Vice Chairman Eckert. All right. Today we do have a number of members that are joining us virtually. For those members, if you do have a question, we want to hear it. We need you to raise your hand, virtually raise your hand, and we will get to you on any given testifier. I would like to give the members that are here an opportunity to introduce themselves. I can't see everybody, so if we could just start on the right side of the room as I'm looking at it and come across, that would be wonderful.
Representative Robert Ledbetter, 109th District.
Representative Alacron Cabbage, 119th District.
Good morning, Jamie Flick, 83rd, Lycoming and Union Counties.
Good morning, Representative Mike Cabell, 117, Luzerne County.
Representative Kristen Marcel from the 178th District in Bucks County. Thank you.
Jamie Barton, 124th Legislative District, serving Schuylkill and Berks counties.
Good morning, Representative Tornecker, representing parts of Adams and Cumberland County.
Good morning, Representative John Schlegel from the 101st District in Lebanon County.
Good morning, everyone. Craig Statz, representing the 145th Legislative District in the great county of Bucks.
Aaron Coffer, 120th District, Luzerne County.
Good morning, everybody. Joe Kerwin, 125th District, Dauphin County.
Good morning, everybody. Dallas Kephart, Clearfield and Cambria County, 73rd District.
Morning, Representative Jim Rigby, Cambria, Somerset County, 71st District. Hey, Nelson.
Good morning, Representative Eric Nelson, Westmoreland County, 57th District.
Thank you. Charity Grimm Krupa. I'm from the 51st District, which is the southern part of Fayette County.
A few more in the corner, but let's get into the topic of the day, which is energy and the rising costs of energy prices. For me personally, this issue hits home very closely. My district, which is the 15th Legislative District, has a nuclear plant in it, has coal mines in the southern portion of the district, and has lots of natural gas all over the area. So energy and energy generation and production is something that I'm very familiar with, and it's also the background from which I come as far as my professional background. I was an attorney for a service company in the energy industry, but today we are starting to see more and more prices going up, issues occurring, obstacles to the opportunities that we have. Our energy industry provides us so many different opportunities that we could be enjoying in Pennsylvania, and I just don't believe that we are getting the most out of what we could, whether it's with new manufacturing or generation or helping other states around us with lowering their prices as well. So very important topic, very important issue. I'm looking forward to hearing from all the testifiers. We're going to start here with the first panel. The first panel is Terry Fitzpatrick, Rachel Gleason, and Dave Callahan. If you all could come up and testify, each of you testify individually, then after we will do a question and answer. Okay, I think we are going to have Mr. Callahan. I believe we're going to ask you to go first. Mr. Callahan is the president of the Marcellus Shale Coalition, and the floor is yours whenever you are ready.
All right. Thanks again, Mr. Chairman. And distinguished members of the committee. I'm Dave Callahan, president of the Marcellus Shale Coalition. The MSC is a statewide trade association representing more than 130 energy companies from the upstream, midstream, and downstream sectors, and those who supply goods and professional services to the industry. I appreciate the opportunity to share some thoughts on how we may work together to address concerns related to increasing energy costs for consumers through policies that expand access to clean, domestic, and affordable sources of energy. While I'll focus the majority of my comments today on energy costs, I encourage you to read my written testimony for more background and color on the industry and its very many positive impacts. For context, I note that in 2008, Pennsylvania produced just 25% of the natural gas we use in the state. And natural gas was an insignificant part of our electric generation portfolio, well under 10%. Fast forward to today. Pennsylvania is the second largest natural gas producer in the United States. We now produce more than 20% of the nation's natural gas and serve a key role as both a domestic and international supplier. This abundance has attracted more than $13 billion of new natural gas generation in Pennsylvania. Natural gas generation has grown to 53% of our power generation portfolio today. And Pennsylvania is now the largest exporter of electricity in the entire nation. While some to our east and north have been critical of Pennsylvania, the fact is we are keeping their lights on. In 2021, Pennsylvania produced the same amount of electricity as Massachusetts, Maryland, New Jersey, and New York combined. In 2008, natural gas prices routinely exceeded $12 or $13 per standard unit of measure. And nationally, companies were investing in natural gas import facilities and figuring out which nations could supply us with natural gas, all just to maintain the status quo. What happened over the next 15 years was unprecedented and altered the nation's energy strategy and the global marketplace. The United States went from an energy importer to an energy exporter, providing us with something that had been considered unattainable: energy security. Innovation and technology unlocked resources that provided an abundant supply of natural gas and oil, and consumer prices began to fall. It's important to understand that here in Pennsylvania, even with the higher electricity prices that consumers have seen over the past year, electricity still costs between 30% and 40% less today than it did in 2008. Public Utility Commission data also shows that through 2021, the energy costs of homeowners' natural gas bills have gone down between 61% and 76%. This is most beneficial to lower-income individuals. So actions and policies that either directly or indirectly hinder the development and transportation of natural gas only hurt those who need the most help by driving up costs. To understand the impact of restricting access to natural gas, we need only look to New England consumers who pay 81% more for their electricity than Pennsylvanians. This is primarily because of the blockade New York has imposed on pipelines, prohibiting access to Pennsylvania natural gas. To further emphasize the need to ensure affordable energy, a U.S. Senate white paper analyzing the impacts of increased energy costs found that for every 10% increase in energy costs, 840,000 people across the United States are pushed into energy poverty. A recent study from Texas examining the impact of energy prices on lower-income households demonstrated that policies restricting and banning access to natural gas can be devastating to lower-income families. The report found that a transition away from natural gas would spike energy costs and disproportionately impact lower-income households who would have to pay nearly 2 or 3 times as much for electricity compared to natural gas. Preserving consumers' ability to access diverse energy supplies is directly related to their ability to access affordable and reliable energy. Reliability is often overlooked in this equation. We need the electricity to flow when the hospital, school, senior citizen living center, or household with vulnerable citizens call upon it. Access to natural gas for heating our homes, cooking our food, heating our water, or powering our businesses and manufacturers is critical. In addition to sourcing the supply, this diversifies our energy portfolio and reduces stress on our electric grid. Indeed, 3.4 million households in Pennsylvania, with nearly 8.4 million residents, use natural gas as their primary heating source. Imagine if prohibitive and punitive policies like those being advanced in jurisdictions like New York were in place here. Extreme weather events could risk life-threatening disruptions for Pennsylvanians because our electric grid would become overwhelmed. We appreciate and support legislation that safeguards the ability of consumers to access their desired energy source. We're particularly grateful to Representative O'Neill for championing this legislation last session, and for Representative Marcel for leading the effort this session. Unlike some states, Pennsylvania has a mature, robust, competitive energy marketplace that allows consumers in many service territories to choose their electric or natural gas supplier. There are options for many consumers to access energy below their utility's default price. In order to ensure affordable energy prices, we need to boost our production of natural gas and our build-out of our infrastructure. And one of the most critical challenges to this expansion is the inability to acquire operating permits in a predictable time frame. Whether they're permits required to produce, process, or transport the gas, Pennsylvania's process to review and approve required permits is entirely unpredictable and unnecessarily time-consuming. While the Department of Environmental Protection has a permit decision guarantee policy, in reality, the policy is not adhered to. Too often, rather than either approving or denying a permit, the department takes no action while it consistently re-engineers project designs, requests additional information from applicants far beyond what the permit instructions compel, or it imposes permit criteria that are not found in statute or regulation. There's a significant inconsistency across the Commonwealth as well. In some regions, particularly north-central Pennsylvania, permits can be secured in a predictable time frame, albeit longer than through the Permit Decision Guarantee Program. However, in some cases, particularly in southwestern Pennsylvania, it can take several hundred days to obtain a simple, straightforward earth disturbance permit for a well pad, compressor station, or a pipeline. We greatly appreciate the actions of members of this committee to advance legislative solutions to reform permitting and provide greater predictability through proposals such as deemed approved legislation that would hold the department accountable to a set timeline, and third-party permit review that is utilized successfully in other agencies and other states. While no legislative solution will ever fully address the bureaucratic maladies that frustrate energy development in Pennsylvania, knowing that we have strong, vocal, and effective advocates in the General Assembly and in this caucus has been reassuring. On behalf of the MSC member companies and their employees, thank you for the opportunity to provide testimony at today's hearing. Our members and their employees are rightfully proud for the role they play each day to provide clean, reliable, and affordable energy to your constituents. You can count on us to work cooperatively with you, the governor, and your colleagues in the Senate to advocate and advance smart policy that builds upon our strong foundation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Callahan. Rachel Gleason with the Pennsylvania Coal Alliance Executive Director. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Chairman Kale. Chairman Kale and members of the Policy Committee, it's a pleasure to see all of you this bright Monday non-session day. There's a lot of you here, so it's nice to see some new faces. My name is Rachel Gleason. I am the Executive Director of the Pennsylvania Coal Alliance, and I appreciate the opportunity to provide testimony on the price of energy in Pennsylvania. The PCA is the principal trade organization that represents underground and surface bituminous coal operators in Pennsylvania, as well as other associated companies whose businesses rely on coal mining and a strong coal economy. Nationally, Pennsylvania is the third largest coal-producing state, and PCA member companies produce nearly 90% of the bituminous coal mined annually in Pennsylvania, which totaled over 42 million tons in 2022. PCA does not directly represent any generation. However, high BTU thermal coal that is mined in our state is sent to power plants in Pennsylvania and in PJM. Fuel receipts to generators have not been finalized for 2022, but the preliminary estimates from the U.S. Energy Information Administration indicate that 25 million tons of Pennsylvania-mined thermal coal was sent to U.S. power plants, 80% of which was sent to plants operating in PJM states. In determining the price of electricity, it's complicated. There's several considerations that contribute to the price a residential customer pays for electricity. First, there's the wholesale electricity market, which is operated by our regional transmission organization called PJM. PJM operates a competitive wholesale electricity market and manages the reliability of its transmission grid. In managing the grid, PJM dispatches generation and coordinates the movement of wholesale electricity in all or part of 13 states, serving 65 million people. PJM determines the lowest cost of available generators needed to meet demand for every hour, and then determines a clearing price at each location in the region for each hour, which is referred to as the locational marginal price, or the LMP. Each generator is paid by LMP multiplied by its production in each hour. The continuous determination of the LMP by PJM is referred to as PJM's energy market. The energy market consists of the day-ahead and the real-time markets. The day-ahead market is exactly how the title sounds. Its prices are set for energy that will be delivered the next day. The hourly prices are determined by generators offering supply and utilities bidding demand from low to high until the projected demand is met, plus some reserves. There are a number of factors that contribute to offers from generators, including fuel cost, maintenance, labor, and taxpayer subsidies. The day-ahead market solidifies generation expectations for the next operating day, provides price certainty and less price volatility. The LMP is settled twice, once in the day-ahead market and again in the real-time market. Any deviations from what cleared the day-ahead market is addressed in the real-time market. The real-time market similarly addresses immediate electricity needs in real time. If a supplier of electricity commits to running, it will be paid the day-ahead price and the real-time price for any generation that exceeds what is scheduled. The day-ahead and the real-time markets average a little over 60% of the wholesale cost of electricity in PJM. PJM's capacity market is also a component of the wholesale market. The capacity market is a commitment to provide electricity 3 years in advance to ensure sufficient supply and delivery in an emergency. In exchange for the commitment, generation sources are provided a daily guaranteed payment. Historically, the capacity market accounts for just under 20% of the wholesale cost. Then we have the retail market. On the retail side of things, the distributor is separate from the supplier in Pennsylvania. An electric distribution company is the utility that manages the distribution of electricity to customers, reads meters, sends bills, addresses outages, fixes poles and lines when there's a problem. Separately, the electric generation supplier provides retail electricity. Each EGS is reselling electricity it acquired on the wholesale market to provide a rate that is appealing to those shopping for electricity. If a consumer opts not to shop, the distribution company or their utility offers a default service. So that's all something to consider when you think about the price of electricity and the markets. For coal markets, coal is a global commodity that's subject to the ebbs and flows of supply and demand. The year 2022 was as bizarre of a year as 2020 was. Looking back 2 years at the pandemic and lockdowns, the former governor declaring our industry non-essential and then correcting that declaration, we had a depression-like economy and saw record low coal production in Pennsylvania and record low demand. Operators had to cut expenses and, in some cases, idle mines. Fast forward 2 years to a war between Russia and Ukraine, China refusing Australian coal imports, and Europe barely having enough power to keep their lights on, demand skyrocketed globally for coal, and prices increased. In 2022, we saw domestic thermal prices climbing over $200 a ton for bituminous coal, and exports at double that price. Industry has contracted over the past years, and overproduction does not exist as it would have in the past when new mines would pop up to make a quick dollar. The operators in the current market survived previous downtrends and planned their production based on permitting, access to capital, and market predictions. Nevertheless, no one predicted a pandemic and the economic realities that followed. The coal industry adjusted as much as possible to increase production when the economy turned back on, but demand remained high throughout the year. Considering this, when discussing the price of electricity, it's important to understand the LMP that I just talked about, that PJM determines, and how it impacts which generation sources are chosen to meet demand. As of September 2022, 49% of PJM's installed capacity was natural gas, 24% was coal, and 18% was nuclear. However, installed capacity does not translate to consistently operating, which is where the day-ahead market, the real-time market, and the capacity payments come into play. Prices are a key outcome of markets and is an indicator of competition. According to Monitoring Analytics, in the first 9 months of 2022, the prices were the highest in PJM since the market was created in 1999. The largest contributor to increased prices was the cost of fuel, primarily natural gas and coal. Because coal was in such demand in 2022, U.S. power plants conserved the coal they had to try to rebuild stocks. Generally, when gas prices are high, as they were in August of this year, hitting $10 per million BTU, utilities turn to coal. But this year, many turned to natural gas and paid the high prices due to low coal inventories. Since utilities cannot store gas at the plants, it was critical for them to rebuild coal inventories to cover any emergencies in the winter. U.S. coal inventories grew from 82 million tons at the end of August to 94 million tons at the end of November, and just in time as Winter Storm Elliott in December required a lot of coal to once again come to the rescue to keep the lights on. Coal-fired electric generation is the only source of baseload power with on-site fuel that can ramp up when called upon. However, coal is no longer the predominant source on PJM's grid. Natural gas generation has rapidly increased and displaced most coal-fired generation over the past 20 years, especially in Pennsylvania. Nevertheless, coal is the only generation source that repeatedly comes to the rescue of 65 million people, and Winter Storm Elliott should raise many red flags when it comes to the volatility of our grid and price. PJM saw 23% of its generating fleet shut down on December 24th, 2022. Since the storm, PJM acknowledged that they underestimated demand by 10%. And while no fuel source came through the bitter cold unscathed, mechanical challenges and the frigid temperatures took plants of all kinds offline. Natural gas plants accounted for 70% or 32 gigawatts of the nearly 46 gigawatts of outages, the majority due to fuel availability and equipment failures. PJM has faced gas supply problems from the cold weather before, but it's a growing problem becoming more pronounced as the gas generation sources account for a larger share of the grid's dispatchable baseload generation. In January of 2018, during another polar vortex event, half of the total PJM natural gas capacity was not available to supply peak demand. And in February of 2014, during another cold snap, PJM found that 23% of the total generator outages were due to interruptions of natural gas supply. In both 2018 and 2014, it was coal generation that came to the rescue, ramping up power supply when gas couldn't. And to be clear, I like my friends in the natural gas industry, but when gas couldn't, when nuclear stayed the same because nuclear cannot ramp, and when renewables do what renewables do, work some of the time and didn't work the rest of the time. A recent report from the North American Electric Reliability Corporation concluded fossil fuel plants are being removed from the grid too quickly to continue to meet demand. As we electrify everything from cars to homes, we are dismantling the grid and adding taxpayer-subsidized unreliable sources. These unreliable sources, or renewables, not only distort the day-ahead market and the capacity market, but they also increase the risk of grid failure during weather events like Winter Storm Elliott. In a filing earlier this month to FERC, the independent market monitor agreed that PJM has permitted offers from capacity resources that were incorrectly defined as capacity and agreed that those offers should not have been permitted. Ensuring the grid is comprised of diverse generation sources that compete on a level playing field keeps the market competitive, provides reliability and resiliency, and controls costs because of the competition. Subsidizing generation sources distorts the market and lowers capacity payments, leading to base load not being compensated for being available to perform when needed, threatening reliability, and directly impacting capital investments, including maintenance. All this considered, this past year was very volatile for the coal markets, and while 2022 saw record coal demand that increased prices, January 2023 has not been a great month for coal burn, and gas prices have plummeted, which has led to slightly increased coal inventories, utility stockpiles making a rebound, and lower prices per ton. I want to thank the committee for the opportunity to testify, and I welcome any questions at the end of this panel.
Thank you, Ms. Gleason. Our final testifier for this panel is Terry Fitzpatrick, who's the president and CEO of the Energy Association of Pennsylvania. The floor is yours.
Good morning, Chairman Kale, members of the committee. Thanks very much for the opportunity to be here. Yes, I am president of the Energy Association of PA. We're a trade group that represents the electric and natural gas utilities in the state. The bottom line here, and you're going to hear a lot of common themes from what I say from what the previous two testifiers did, but electric and natural gas utility bills are certainly higher this year, and that's due to increases in the wholesale prices of electricity and natural gas. Those prices really rose since the spring of 2021, and I think there's just a few factors there. The economic recovery coming out of the pandemic, the war in Ukraine certainly had a big effect, and then just general inflationary pressures that are causing the price of almost everything to go up over the past couple of years. I give some numbers about what happened to the wholesale price of electricity and gas in my testimony, but I can just sum it up. From the spring of 2021 to the fall of 2022, there was a tripling of the wholesale prices in both the electricity and natural gas wholesale markets. That's what caused the utility bills to go up. But I think, as Rachel mentioned, there is some good news here in that the wholesale price of natural gas has really gone down the past couple of months. So I think that's good news. And EII, the Energy Information Administration, projects that it's going to be more moderate prices for the remainder of this year. So those are forecasts. They're not guarantees, but I think that's relatively good news. The rise in the wholesale prices of gas and electricity caused the utility bills to go up as well. Now, Pennsylvania has restructured its electricity and natural gas markets, and what that means is that the utilities do not produce the energy. Utilities do not own power plants. They don't own natural gas wells. So in order to get supplies for customers, our members have to go into the wholesale markets and buy that. The fact that we've restructured also means, and I think Rachel mentioned this, that you don't have to buy your supplies from your gas utility or your electric utility. You can go into the market and buy from a competitive supplier. And I should mention that I'm very familiar with that because before I took this job, I was a member of the Public Utility Commission. Prior to that, I was a staffer in the state Senate, and I'm proud to say I helped to write the electricity competition law. So I've seen that law operating ever since it passed in the 1990s. Under the electric competition law and the gas competition law, electric and gas utilities have a legal obligation to provide energy supplies for the customers who choose not to buy from competitive suppliers. The process by which the utilities buy those supplies is overseen by the Public Utility Commission. They have to make filings with the PUC. They have to get those plans approved by the PUC. And all the different parties that have an interest, consumer groups, they have a right to participate in those proceedings. And very importantly, electric and gas utilities don't earn a profit on those energy sales. The profits that our members need profits for shareholders, of course, but those profits are earned on the distribution rates that they charge. The energy costs are just to pass through to our members. So we don't profit from the fact that these prices have gone up on the utility side that I represent. The electric and gas utilities adjust their charges for the supply service either quarterly or twice a year. The supply charges typically make up about half of a customer's bill now with these higher prices. In order to increase the distribution part of the bill, the distribution charges, there's a different process there. Utilities have to file a base rate case with the PUC, and that means they have to open their books. They have to show what their revenues are, what their expenses are, and their capital investments. And that's a very intensive process that's usually litigated if it's not settled. And at the end, the Public Utility Commission has the responsibility to determine what are just and reasonable rates for the utility, including what their profit levels can be. Well, what can electric and gas customers do to respond to these increased prices? One thing they can do is consider budget billing, which spreads out higher costs. It evens your bills throughout the year, which makes it easier for a lot of people to budget. You could also conserve energy, and you can always find tips on how to do that on all the utilities' websites, and they educate customers. The Public Utility Commission also does this education function, how customers can save. The electric utilities, or the larger electric utilities under Act 129 of 2008, will offer programs to help customers pay for the price of energy efficiency improvements as well. And even for the utilities, gas utilities, which don't have that legal obligation, they usually offer programs to help customers save. Customers can also consider offers from competitive suppliers. With the recent drop in gas prices and electricity prices past couple months, I went on the Power Switch website of the PUC just this morning, and I looked, my service territory, which is PPL, and there are a number of offers which are lower than the price that PPL offers now. So this is probably going to be a good time, I would say, for shopping. And by the way, PPL or any of the utilities, they are indifferent to whether customers shop or not, because the way they buy the power, they're assured that they're going to get the cost back. So, our members have actually tried to educate customers about shopping, and we always remind customers that they have those shopping opportunities as well. If customers are having difficulty paying their electricity or gas bill, the first thing they should do is not ignore the problem, but contact their utility and see what kind of assistance options are out there. Generally speaking, there are a couple of different kinds of programs there. There's universal service programs, as we call them, which are internally funded through utility rates. The largest component of that are customer assistance programs, where customers pay based upon their income and their ability to pay. The amount that is paid statewide for that, I think in the most recent year, 2021, was $458 million. So that is a very significant set of assistance programs that are helping customers. There are also government-sponsored programs to assist customers, probably the most prominent one being the Low-Income Home Energy Assistance Program, or LIHEAP as it's called. There were also some COVID-19 related specific programs, such as the Homeowners Assistance Fund. And our members have helped to coordinate that to make sure that assistance gets out to folks. So with that, I'll conclude my testimony and look forward to your questions.
Thank you. Thank you. I just want a couple brief comments before I ask a question. We hand it over to the members. Mr. Callahan, you had mentioned permitting and permitting issues. I think that issue has come up in every single one of our hearings already, and that includes hearings on workforce development, obviously ones on manufacturing and regulatory reform, but it's just an interesting consistency. And Ms. Gleason, I find it fascinating that we are in a world today where we are paying more for certain energy providers that we're getting less actual goods out of. It's a remarkable situation where usually in the market, if you're getting less for a service, you pay less. But with the renewables, you actually pay more for less service, which is a fascinating situation. But I wanted to go into a question about what happened last month. And this, you hear about things like this happening in California with brownouts and stuff like that. Can you explain, last month there was a situation in December, I think it was because of that polar vortex, I can't exactly remember the dates, where there was threats of actually having to turn off your lights for 30 minutes at a time. There's some message went out. Can you explain as to what that is, how that works? And it's the first time I've ever heard of something like that in our area anyway. And I'm assuming that's what happens in places like California when there's too much energy usage for the capacity.
It does happen in California. I'll say it's a little bit different because I think California has a little bit of an over-reliance on renewables, which results in them not showing up. They actually, ironically, import coal generation from Utah. So they like to have their fossil fuels produce their energy outside of their state lines, but we know that transmission lines don't know borders. In December, there were issues all over the place. The Tennessee Valley Authority, which is regulated, had some issues. There were issues in North Carolina. There was issues in ISO New England and in PJM. PJM was predominantly because they underestimated the generation that they would need, but then they also didn't forecast, and I'm not sure how you would forecast for this, the problems with deliveries with fuel supply for natural gas and equipment failures. In ISO New England, there were issues with natural gas being so expensive that they then decided to burn oil because oil was ironically cheaper than natural gas at the time. So, I mean, it's very much when you think of the markets as a supply and demand kind of issue. What also we're not talking about is, the demand on the grid when Winter Storm Elliott happened was high. It might have been the highest at any point ever, but nobody's talking about we're electrifying everything. We're still serving the same number of people, or roughly the same number of people, but when you have folks encouraging, not to put natural gas in your home and electrify your home and get an electric car, which I admittedly have one, you are putting more demand on the grid. It's not like the temperatures were abnormal. They were cold, but it's not like it didn't happen before. It's just the demand was so much higher from previous times. So, I mean, there were fuel supply issues. There were, again, I advocate for coal, obviously, so we are, again, the only source with fuel on site, which makes us very attractive when there's an emergency. But back to paying more with taxpayer subsidies, and, you manipulate the capacity market when certain subsidies can bid in at zero. So when they don't actually have a cost, they don't have a fuel cost, they don't have a labor cost, and they're getting a subsidy from the government to just install them, they can bid in at zero, which distorts all the markets because other reliable sources are bidding into that same market. They have to show up, but we know that solar doesn't win it. When solar doesn't work at 2 a.m., wind might work, might not work. There's issues with wet snow, and I mean, there's all kinds of factors that contribute to that I could probably talk about for a pretty long time, but that's what happened. They did not estimate the generation they needed, and then there were supply issues all over the grid. I don't know if you want to add anything.
If I could just join in, I guess, in the final analysis, no one did lose their power, despite record drop in temperature. While it wasn't the coldest we've experienced, it was the most significant drop over the shortest period of time that we've experienced. It was truly of historic proportions. And people didn't lose their power. Supplies were provided, and we even had enough power, despite the miscalculations at PJM, to export power to other regions that were sorely lacking in power. Now, there are certainly lessons to be learned from this. One of the first ones is, as Rachel pointed out, government picking winners and losers, adding more to the grid when the grid isn't ready to handle it can only lead to more problems. Competition has been good for the state, for the retail customers and others. We should allow competition to continue in the wholesale market as well.
I agree with what both Dave and Rachel said here. And I think it occurs to me, thinking back to my days on the Public Utility Commission, but reliability problems can occur for a couple of different reasons. You might remember a couple of years ago, Texas had a terrible problem when they got a cold snap. They were less well prepared for it there than we are here. They really had problems with blackouts. People died in Texas because of what happened there. And there's been a lot of study of the aftermath of that and the fact that a lot of providers, it's probably across all the different industries, didn't adequately winterize those facilities. And as a result, you had these blackouts. That didn't happen here. It came closer than anybody would have liked. So I think we need to learn the lessons from that too. I know PJM's looking into that to study what happened. And, there will be some consequences, I think, if folks didn't do what they were supposed to and didn't adequately prepare. Reliability problems can also come, and it's separate, and I think Rachel mentioned this as well. Another problem that the folks who run the grid are worried about, the North American Electric Reliability Council, which really has responsibility for that, they're concerned about over-reliance on intermittent sources, renewable sources, and the question of how much can you rely on them? How much transmission do you need if you're going to rely on them more so you can get the power from the wind areas out in the Midwest to the east? That's also a separate concern, and that's the big problem probably that California faces. So reliability problems can come up for a couple different reasons.
So just kind of continue this conversation. If, let's say, for instance, hypothetically, that the that the renewable energy percentage on the alternative energy portfolio was 30% instead of where it's at today, how would that have affected the situation? Would it have, would it not have? Is that irrelevant to it? Or is more reliance on renewables going to lead to more problems when we run into cold weather?
I think that's something I would want to hear from PJM and the folks that really study that. I'm focused now mostly on distribution utility issues, not on that. But I do think generally throughout the country, that's something that needs to be looked at. I think as you bring more renewables online, one of the things that happens with that, you don't always displace and get rid of like coal plants or natural gas plants because you need them for when the renewables are not operating. So you have to find a way to pay them oftentimes to stay in the market so that they can be there to back it up. So that tends to increase the price too. So, whenever I talk about energy, I think you always need to keep in mind what's important there. Affordability is important. Reliability and security is important. Environmental sustainability is important as well, and that's what's leading the push towards renewables. But anytime you focus on one of them and kind of lose sight of the others, you're heading for problems. And I would probably fault, some of our neighboring states, California, for getting so focused on environmental sustainability and maybe not being very realistic about what it takes to have a good system, that's what causes some of the problems. I think Pennsylvania's done a pretty good job over the years in having a balanced energy policy and avoiding a lot of those pitfalls.
All right. Vice Chairman Eckert.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I had a legislative breakfast in my district on Friday or last Thursday, and we talk about the typical things: property tax, lottery proceeds, transportation issues. But I also had a question from a constituent in an area where natural gas and energy isn't really an industry that folks know about. But they asked the question of, how are we going to protect my ability to choose where to get my energy? You hear all these municipalities and states that are trying to ban natural gas and these initiatives out there. And that was something that came up at that breakfast. People really do care about having that choice here in Pennsylvania like we have. I remember when those commercials first came out, where do you think you live? Pennsylvania, is to choose where our energy is. So my question to really the panel, but probably to you, Mr. Callahan, is what impact would a piece of legislation that bans or a municipality bans natural gas or bans the use of gas stoves, you hear those kinds of conversations. What's the impact of a piece of legislation like that on Pennsylvania's ability to provide energy?
Thank you. That's a very insightful question by your constituent. It's detrimental to the marketplace. It's detrimental to the consumer. That's why your colleague, Representative Marcel, is going to be introducing legislation guaranteeing choice. We see examples in other states, most recently in New York State, where the governor has introduced legislation seeking to ban new natural gas hookups. That is just putting all your eggs in one basket. It's not being realistic. It's ignoring consumer choice. What can be done is protecting the ability to choose. It's ensuring that consumer choice exists on the retail end as well for choosing their electric supplier and gas supplier as well. It goes across the board.
And I think it's important to note that allows folks to choose renewables if they so choose. But to outright ban, I mean, again, you're interrupting the free market that we as Americans so choose. It's what our country is built upon. So I think allowing that free market, allowing choice, and Representative Marcel's bill here would be something that we should absolutely push forward. So thank you.
Representative Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the testifiers today. Mr. Callahan, I wanted to dig a little bit deeper. In your testimony, you mentioned Connecticut. I think it was that their energy costs were about 81% higher for their consumers. Kind of building on that, I think Connecticut is a RGGI state. We're involved in that RGGI world. We've been battling, Governor Wolf's executive action to implement RGGI. What type of impact would RGGI have if it's continued to be implemented under this governor for businesses and consumers?
Well, let me go back to a couple of things. The reference was to New England as a whole, where they're paying 81% more for electricity. And we've seen
all states, all New England states.
Yes. And we've seen examples that my colleague here, Rachel, just mentioned about New England paying higher prices for natural gas because they're competing with international customers for that natural gas because of the lack of pipelines, because of the lack of infrastructure to deliver natural gas from productive areas like Pennsylvania, Ohio, West Virginia. They're paying international prices to have products shipped from international sources. For Reggie, you know, that's something that, quite honestly, should have been subject to debate in this entire General Assembly from start to finish, for you to hear from people in New England, to hear from regional power grids and others to see what impact it would have as well.
And what, for the panel across the board, what damage do you think has already been done just by the threat of Reggie and the imposing threat? You know, how has that impacted producers and man hours for Pennsylvania workers?
I just wanted to add one thing before I answer that question to what Dave said. The same New York State that wants to ban the natural gas hookups is the same New York State that prevents pipelines from getting to New England, which is why New England has to import LNG.
Is that the same state that buys their natural gas from Russia?
I don't know if New York buys from Russia.
New England, pardon me, I always forget the mic rule. New England was notoriously in front pages a couple of years ago for having a tanker in harbor with natural gas from Russia, as a matter of fact, to help them get through the winter. Yes.
As far as the impact of Reggie on industry, I can't speak for any generators specifically. I don't have access to their inside workings, but I will say that from a coal perspective, we often, and this probably goes back to Chairman Kale's point on permitting too, we produce based on planning. So you don't just mine coal and have it sit on the ground. You have contracts with utilities. You plan for permitting. Permitting an underground coal mine in Pennsylvania can take up to 5 years. You know, it's not something you just turn the spigot back on. So I think, and this is just a general observation, but generators seeing the threat of Reggie don't want to commit to perhaps longer-term utility fuel or longer-term fuel contracts because of the planning in the out years. And if they are saddled with a, $11, $13 tax on their per ton of CO2, they're not going to be able to operate. So I do think it's created a little bit more volatility and, back to renewables kind of distorting the capacity markets. It's made the capacity prices lower, which means those same generators aren't getting capacity payments in some scenarios, which, is a domino effect down to maintenance, so on and so forth.
And you mentioned international prices and international competitors. Can you touch on what China has been doing with their coal plants over these last couple of years?
They just keep building them.
So China's building coal plants as we're...
Yeah, China, Indonesia, they're all building coal plants.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Stats.
Thank you, Chairman Kale, and thank you to our panel for being here. We certainly appreciate your time. And I know this panel is primarily related to oil, gas, and coal, but perhaps you could provide some insight to this question. I was actually at a scout group, with a scout group last night, and I opened it up to questions to include the parents. And the question I had, the one gentleman uses a wind turbine to produce energy for his home and has seen the cost of that go up. So his question to me, which I'll pose to you, is has the cost of air increased, or what do you think has caused the increase?
All right, I clearly drew the short straw here. The sky's the limit on answering that question. At the very least, we're looking at general inflationary pressures all across the board, across all sectors of the economy, impacting global prices for components that go into those turbines. It's a product of what we're dealing with as a national economy.
Okay. Another question, if I may, Mr. Chairman. And we've been speaking about pipelines. And this is a question that comes up very often back home when I'm in the district. Can you speak to the impact decisions like shutting down the Keystone XL pipeline have on the cost of energy?
There we go. Certainly. I believe the federal government itself, around the holiday time, released a report impacting the results of shutting down the pipeline. You know, tens of thousands of construction trade union jobs were lost. The impact on the marketplace was significant as well. Pipelines are absolutely critical to our country advancing in terms of its economy, in terms of also advancing our environmental progress as well. Pipelines are the safest, most efficient means of transporting natural gas. Other means exist. They're helpful in certain instances, but pipelines are the primary means. We need more pipelines. We need more capacity. In talking about the event of last December around Christmas time, you know, more supply, more pipelines could have greatly aided the situation.
Yeah, I want to jump in on that too, and I agree with what Dave said. I think that one of the things that I worry about looking ahead is that some of the anti-fossil fuel rhetoric and extremism trying to shut down anything related to fossil fuels, I just wonder how that's going to hurt us in the long run if that prevails. I don't think it's prevailed here in Pennsylvania. I hope it doesn't. But, you know, I think you're going to hear maybe a little bit of testimony about Europe, some of the things happening in Europe before we're done here, and the problems they have now because of the policies they've followed, where they won't develop their own energy resources. Now, I'm not going to downplay or minimize the environmental concerns we have out there. I mean, folks want to reduce carbon emissions, but again, we need a balance between affordability, energy reliability and security, and also that environmental sustainability. If we stop building new things for the energy sources that we rely upon now, that is not going to paint a good picture for where we're going in the future, and I would hate to see that.
I appreciate your answers. Thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
Representative Coffer, excuse me.
Thank you, Chairman Kale. Terry, I actually really appreciate your testimony, and I always talk about the four-legged stool of energy in regard to the affordability, reliability, security, and sustainability. Spot on. And what I think our consumers are dealing with right now, the focus shifting over to the affordability piece, as a lot of people all throughout Pennsylvania right now are getting sticker shock as they're getting their utility bills and seeing the rise. I mean, I had my own sticker shock seeing my own price of what I'm paying for my utilities at my home. So a couple questions I have in regard to that. What should we be looking at as lawmakers, as legislators and policymakers? What kind of policy tools should we be looking at to try to address that affordability issue right now? Are there tools that we have in our toolbox that we should be focusing on right now? And then the other type of question that I have was looking at the Act 129 programs relating to energy efficiency, trying to drive down demand, to try to address pricing, how they are working right now. I know that other states are looking at trying to do some other issues like off-peak energy initiatives, like when people are charging their electric vehicles, that it would be done at an off-peak time, or things like that, that are reliant on battery technology right now. Have we considered anything like that here, and how would that play into our EDCs and others? So I know it's a lot into one question there, Terry, but if you could address that, I'd really appreciate it.
Yeah, I'll try to answer. Just remind me if I forget any part of that, Representative, as I go through. I'm very much a basics, sort of a back-to-basics person, you know, and over the long run, I think what the General Assembly can do is all of the basic things that allows for the continued production of energy. And I think Pennsylvania has done a tremendous job of that. We've benefited ourselves. Honestly, we've benefited the whole country. These prices that we're talking about, which are so bad, would be worse if we weren't producing, because it's just basically supply and demand. What we do, I think, has a big impact. So I would say kind of keep that kind of balanced energy policy going forward, you know, is one of the great things there. I would also echo what others have said and also compliment Representative Marcel on the Energy Choice Bill, which our association supports as well. Thank you for doing that. As far as EVs, I think you mentioned EVs. That was part of it, Representative. We are studying what kind of rates there ought to be for EVs to make sure that we use the grid most efficiently. Basically, get those folks to charge at night if you can, because that's when there's low demand on the grid. So that's something that's under study by the Public Utility Commission as well as by our electric members and how to do that.
And just one piece there about Act 129 programs. Anything that you think we could do to revamp it right now? Obviously, there's a lot of tools in the toolbox in that one as well. Anything that you're thinking that we could do to revamp to get back out to our consumers to help drive down costs and lower demand? Anything that you see out there that we can be updating in regard to that?
I think when it comes to Act 129, probably just about every group out there, whether you're talking about energy efficiency providers or utilities, large industrial customers, which are paying a lot of money under that program, everybody has something they would like to do to that program. So it gets really pretty complicated if you talk about going in and trying to change that law. We probably object to some of the draconian penalties that are on our members if they don't meet their targets for no fault of their own, because that's the way that law is written. Having said all that, I do think those energy efficiency programs work pretty well. The energy efficiency industry would tell you we should be putting more money into it. But 250 million, I think it's about 250 million a year statewide goes into that. So it's a pretty significant sum. Again, where's the balance between affordability and environmental sustainability? That's kind of the debate, I think, on that.
And I just say that when you're talking about some of those industrial customers, that's probably some of the focus that would actually help our consumers at the end of the day by helping to get that sustainability and their costs down by creating that efficiency. So thank you again for answering those questions.
Thank you, Representative Coffer. Online, Representative Diamond.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the testifiers for coming forth. I've got two questions. Let me start with the first one, which is for Mr. Callahan. Regarding your testimony, you had mentioned that energy prices now are cheaper than they were at some point in the past, and I don't recall exactly when that was. But can you tell us, was that in raw dollars, inflation-adjusted dollars, or maybe as a percentage of household income, that sort of thing? Because that's, to my constituents, that's really the meaningful piece for them, is how much does my energy cost in relation to how much I'm bringing home?
Representative, those were raw dollars, to the best of my knowledge, when we quoted $12 to $13 per MCF or per standard unit of measure for natural gas.
Oh, okay, thank you so much. And that just, underscores the point that we also have to consider inflation generally when we're talking about cost to consumer. My second question, Mr. Chairman, is for anyone on the panel here. And I realize that none of you are actually sending bills to my constituents, but it's kind of related to Representative Coffer's comments about sticker shock. Now, I personally have not really seen any sticker shock in my utility bills, but I have heard from constituents who have seen extreme sticker shock. So I'm wondering if you can, because you're on the supply side mostly, and you're probably more objective about this than any utility companies, who are directly billing customers. Well, what, in your opinion, would be policies that we can pursue that would help prevent this sort of sticker shock in the future going forward for our constituents?
Outside of policies, I would encourage your constituents to shop for their electricity as much as possible. I know personally, I think I looked yesterday actually, and PPL's rate right now I think is about 14 cents. I personally have our house locked in at 11 in a long-term contract, so that's probably the best thing you can offer them at this point in time as far as shopping for electricity and reducing your costs. Policy-wise, I don't know if you guys have anything to add.
Yeah, there are shopping opportunities out there, like I said, and it is a good time to look at that. Beyond that, in answering the representative's question, I'd go back to what I said before. I don't think there's anything you can do to keep energy markets from going up and down. I just don't think it's in the ability of government to stop that. But the best thing you can do over the long term is have policies in place that allow for us to produce energy so that supply and demand, because supply and demand determines the price. As long as we continue to produce, I think that will help to even out the extremes of some of these fluctuations.
think that's a common theme you've heard from all of us, and Chairman Kale, you mentioned you've heard from others as well. In the long term, getting after those permits, trying to find a way to ensure more predictability in permits, in the permitting program at the Department of Environmental Protection and elsewhere is key. And again, this is about the third time, Representative Marcel, we're going to highlight your legislation. Don't foreclose on consumer choice to choose their, number one, their energy supplier, but their source of energy as well. Allow consumers to make those choices. We need more energy. We need more choices. We need a broad-based supply of energy from all sources to benefit consumers.
And to add to that,
Well, thank you very
sorry, I was going to say, just back to the markets, having that competition there is what holds the price down, and making sure everybody is competing on a level playing field will control those markets.
Well, thank you for those answers. I think your answers underscore the need for a diverse and robust supply side to help our consumers going forward. And we always do want to pursue those sorts of policies. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Marcel.
Thank you, Chairman Kale. First, I wanted to thank the chairman for allowing us to have today's hearing, because energy issues have been brought up a lot in Middle Bucks County, in the area that I represent, whether it's seniors on a fixed income, small businesses, families. It's been a very popular topic, and so I'm really glad that we were able to be here today. I wanted to piggyback off of two comments from other members, so to follow Representative Diamond. I have had a number of people contacting about costs. One gentleman from Southampton, Pennsylvania, reached out to me because he said that his utility bills had increased 25% year over year. And to him, he was thinking to himself, well, we have all of these resources in Pennsylvania, so why is this happening? And so obviously there are a number of things that you've said today that are really helpful to help explain that. But I think that's the sentiment that I'm getting, is I don't understand why, when we have resources in Pennsylvania, my bills keep going up. And so just to share that, I don't want to have you repeat your answers again as to how we can fix that. And then the question that I have is thank you to a number of you for mentioning my energy choice legislation, which is an important thing for my district. A follow-up from Representative Ecker. So we talked about, obviously, the benefits of this legislation, but my question is that I've just been doing some reading about this issue. Do you think that this legislation would hinder a city or a municipality from trying to push forward on their decarbonization goals? If you have any comments about that.
Yeah, I've looked at that, Representative Marcel, and I think it depends. It depends is the answer. It depends how a city's trying to do that. If they're trying to do that by coercing people not to use gas, or just telling them they can only use gas till 2035, something like that, putting a provision like that in any kind of permit or permission they give, a zoning approval for that, for example, that kind of thing. If they're doing that, I think the legislation would stop them. If they're offering a financial incentive, I don't think the legislation does that, because the legislation talks about requirements that a municipality puts on. If you're offering somebody money to electrify, that doesn't, the legislation does not prohibit that on its face.
Thank you for that. I appreciate it. I just wanted to follow up to say that I think, obviously, there are a number of ways that municipalities can do that, but I think at the end of the day, preserving the choice for consumers and ensuring reliability are so important. So just thank you so much for your comments today.
Representative Kerwin.
Thank you, Chairman Kale, and thank you to the panel for being here to testify. So my question's actually for the panel at large. Based off of recent world events, particularly what's going on in Ukraine, as well as the uncertainty in Europe, we've come to understand how important it is for America to be energy independent. Can any of you comment on the role that Pennsylvania plays in ensuring America is energy independent?
They're looking at me. Yeah, as I noted in my testimony, we're the second largest producer of natural gas in the country. You know, I've got a little bit of gray hair. I come from a generation where I remember the oil shocks of the 70s. I remember hearing president after president express a desire to be energy secure, energy independent. Thanks to production here in Pennsylvania and also with our neighbors, we are energy secure. And as we've said in this organization and others around this room have said, energy security is national security. That has been woefully inadequate in Europe. That is certainly something that they're experiencing right now, and quite frankly, they're seeing the benefit of energy security, and they're looking to the United States to help wean them off of unstable, unreliable, unclean supplies of Russian natural gas as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Callahan, for answering that question.
Representative Mako.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And this, I guess, is a question for the panel at large as well. With the passage of the federal infrastructure bill, how does that affect you all as energy producers? And then is there anything that we can do on the state level to help capitalize on, if there is any funds going to energy production? You guys getting any love from the infrastructure bill or no?
Well, we've seen all sorts of federal policies that definitely have an impact on Pennsylvania. We've seen federal legislation now enacted that allows the Department of Energy to fund hydrogen hubs. That is certainly something that we could and should be supporting here in the Commonwealth. It's another example of a great use of natural gas. It's another example of not closing the door, not shutting down opportunities to use this tremendous resource, but allowing technology and advancements to continue to use it in new and different ways to decarbonize portions of the economy. I'll use this as an opportunity to, again, plug infrastructure. We need more infrastructure. We need more infrastructure for natural gas to supply not just domestic markets, international markets as well. I don't know if this group has already heard from folks who are talked about or looking at another export facility on the East Coast, primarily in the Philadelphia, New Jersey area. That would be instrumental in helping out our European neighbors. It would be instrumental in untapping or tapping, I should say, these vast resources here that we have at our disposal in Pennsylvania.
And are you able to capitalize on some of those infrastructure funds to do that, or is that you not know at this time?
It's up to those who are actually proposing the hubs and others. I believe they're actively pursuing that. We've seen a couple of proposals in the region that will be actively pursuing funds.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Krupa.
Thank you, Chairman Kell, for hosting this important policy hearing. Thank you to the testifiers for letting us probe your expertise. My first question is to Mr. Fitzpatrick, and then I have one for the panel at large. But Mr. Fitzpatrick, you mentioned that the cost impact of increasing reliance on unreliable sources such as wind and solar would lead to or could lead to essentially increased costs to the consumer in terms of distribution. Can you elaborate on that? Do you have a ballpark idea of how much that would cost and the impact that that would have on energy poverty?
Yeah, I think the point I was trying to make, I think, in so many ways is for a balance in our energy policies. Now, to some extent, that's going to be in the eyes of the beholder. And I think, I'm not going to completely trash wind and solar here. I mean, whenever I talk about energy sources, I like to say, you talk about, one of the problems I have is people talk about clean energy. And I think, well, any energy source has advantages and disadvantages. They all do. I mean, I could talk about, the nuclear industry is great. It produces carbon-free electricity, but you have that waste problem, and it's very expensive to build. And I won't mention anything bad about gas and coal since they're sitting right next to me right now, but all energy sources have their advantages and their disadvantages. Wind and solar, you don't use fuel. You don't produce carbon, at least when they're operating. Now, building them is another thing with the minerals involved. But the weakness there is they're intermittent. They operate when the wind blows and the sun shines. That doesn't mean you can't have some of them in your system. But if you think they're going to be the workhorses of the system, That's another matter. And so I'm not sure exactly what the percentage is. It probably depends on a lot of factors. Again, PJM probably has the experts on that. But we need a balance in all of those things. And we need to be realistic because, again, I don't think, based on my experience, you can run a system entirely on those types of resources. I think you're heading for trouble if you try to do that.
Thank you. And then for the panel at large, I believe that many of the constituents in my district don't even realize that they can shop for their energy source. So you all have the expertise and probably know exactly where to go, and you probably on a day-to-day basis know how to shop for that and where to go. What information can we take back to our constituents so that they can make educated choices on where they can shop and what they should be looking at, assuming that there's more to look at than just price?
Yeah, I would encourage customers to look at there's two websites run by the Public Utility Commission. There's PA Power Switch, that's on the electric side, and there's the Gas Switch on the gas side. On both of those, you can enter your zip code, and then you get your utilities price to compare. And then if you go down, it shows you the different prices of the suppliers and how they match that price to compare. So you see whether you can save. Now, in doing that, though, I think that's where I would advise customers to start. I would also advise customers, you need to pay attention to the details there. The details are important. What kind of rate product are you getting? What length of time are you locking in a price? Or is it a variable price that can change month to month? Because we've talked a lot about volatility in wholesale markets. If you have a variable price that can go up and down every month, probably most customers can't handle that kind of variability. Is there an early termination fee, if they decide they don't want that supplier anymore? So customers need to do some homework, I think, if they're going to make intelligent choices. But the Power Switch and Gas Switch websites are the place to start.
Thank you.
Representative Ledbetter.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, panelists, for coming and testifying this morning. When I think back to my district and the discussion of energy policy, the rising cost of energy and the economic impact that has, family-sustaining jobs, and the growth that this industry contributes becomes apparent. We all saw the announcement from the governor's administration last week in regard to, excuse me, the money-back guarantee on delays in permits. And as I've joined my colleagues and this policy committee in previous sessions, no one wants their money back. They want their permits. So when we look at the sentiment of that, while that may be well-intended, my question is directed to the entire panel. What would be a proper cost assessment model that you all would agree on that would accurately reflect the negative impact of a delay?
Well, first of all, thank you for the great question. That is, again, it's something that's beguiled the industry, all sectors of Pennsylvania's business community as well, for quite some time. What is the proper cost assessment? I don't know what that number is, but you could look at any number of factors that weigh in. I mean, time is money. If you're not going to develop a factory, if you're not going to develop a well pad, a pipeline, the impact is not just the price of that permit. What about the price that it takes to employ countless experts to put a permit together? There's cost associated with that as well. But I will say, we're encouraged by the fact that the administration is taking a look at this issue. We think there's an opportunity for all of you to work with the administration, with your colleagues in the Senate, and come up with something real and workable that gets these permits out in a predictable time frame and provides some consistency across regions of the Commonwealth as well.
I would echo that and also add that, currently, as Dave mentioned, the permit decision guarantee is in place, but it does not work. There's a completeness review with applications, and often they find something very innocuous to make an application not complete, which ends the time period for the permit decision guarantee. So it's very rarely met. I would also offer that arguably, and I don't want to speak for other industries, we'd probably pay more if we could get a decision, a permit on time. But the wait, the backlog and the wait, time is money. There's a lot of experts, a lot of planning, a lot of testing, a lot of, geologists that go into putting together a permit. So the delays are definitely an issue, and it goes back to the availability of fuel sources, because you can't just turn on the spigot in some cases without having the permit in place.
Representative, I don't have anything to offer in that, as we're not energy producers as the utilities we distribute, but if you'll allow me to riff off of that a little bit and get into a similar type of issue that we do have on the distribution side. We have a lot of issues with all the different, 2,600 municipalities in the Commonwealth when we have to do projects with respect to permit fees, with respect to some of the repaving requirements that really are just wildly inconsistent across the state. Now, I'm a former municipal official, among other things. I was a borough council member, so I'm not dumping on municipal governments here, but we have a lot of litigation going on between utilities and municipalities. Sometimes we think they're using us as a revenue stream. And so that's something, we don't want to make that a legislative issue. We're handling it through litigation. I'm not saying at some point we wouldn't, because we really are having increasing problems there with respect to those types of things. And all of that, of course, the public utilities scrutinizing what we're doing, looking at those costs going up and saying, what's with this? So that too enters into, what you pay on your utility bill.
Thank you for that feedback, and we'll look forward to working with you all. Thank you.
Representative Barton.
Thank you, Representative Kale. Mr. Callahan, I'll direct this towards you, but certainly welcome it to the entire panel. If we flash back 20 years ago, we didn't have enough natural gas for the winter months, right? We were bringing up liquefied natural gas from Texas and other places, and that was setting the price for electricity and for electricity and heat in homes as well. Then the 2008 boom hits, and in 2010 the infrastructure and the innovation of the drilling came as well, and natural gas was almost free. It was we were seeing 2 cents kilowatt hour, right, and it was artificially low, I would say, and because of the abundance, we didn't have anywhere to go with all that natural gas at that time. To put it into perspective, a decatherm was probably $1, $2. If we compare comparing energy sources, we compare it to 1 million BTUs. So 1 million BTUs in heating oil would be about 7.2 gallons or something like that. So $1 or $2 a decatherm is 1 million BTUs in nat gas. So we're going to talk about even if heating oil was $1, which it wasn't, we were talking about $1 versus $7. And then prior to the Russian invasion of Ukraine, we had natural gas was actually creeping up a little bit, and I think there was no drillers really chasing it. There was some over drilling probably, and gotten burned from that. So after that happened, and bear with me, please. Russia-Ukraine conflict happens, and Eastern Europe is in desperate need for fossil fuels, right? And so Texas starts shipping liquefied natural gas across to Eastern Europe to help them out, and that normally would be coming up here if we didn't have to help us out, if we didn't have enough. And what's happening now is no one's investing in new wells, and I think one of the things we see is it's fed, I believe, but certainly want to see if there's you see this and if there's help that we can do. But the lending institutions' credit rating are attacking credit ratings for fossil fuel drillers. And are you seeing that right now, that the actual lending institutions or the larger lending institutions are not wanting to do business with the drillers?
A lot there. Thank you for the question and all the observations. I will note that thanks to the abundance of supply in this region, we've reversed flow on a number of pipelines and are shipping natural gas down to Texas, Louisiana, and elsewhere as well. But in terms of larger financial institutions, I can't recount the exact meeting or hearing that was conducted in Washington, D.C., but a number of the larger institutions were before a panel, and they were asked if they would stop investing in natural gas. And of those larger institutions, one of them actually spoke out, J.P. Morgan, Jamie Dimon, CEO, and said he would definitely not stop investing. So I think they see value in it. I think most of the major ones do. There are niche folks, niche providers of finance who want nothing to do with it. However, they're benefiting from natural gas as well. You have an obligation, you have an opportunity here, along with your federal colleagues, to set that policy environment right, to pursue those common sense policies that my colleagues here have already pointed out that touch upon reliability, cost, availability, security, and sustainability. There's a sweet spot there, and it's not that difficult to hit, and it's all about setting that environment right.
If I could add to what Dave just said, I do think, especially in the coal industry, but we have seen issues with loans and bonding and just capital investments. But I think it's a lot of the environmental and social governance movement, the ESG movement. And there's perhaps, in my opinion, been too much of a reliance on the environmental component of that and not as much of a reliance on the social component of that, which gets to the reliability, resiliency, and cost issues.
Mr. Chairman, if I may. Ms. Gleason, I'll just pass this on also from a regulatory standpoint. The 124th in Schuylkill County, we have anthracite coal, not bituminous. But one of the things that in the committees, should we ever get them, is listed as ER&E, right? Environmental resources and energy together. And often the coal industry is attacked for not caring about that. And likewise, I should don't want to leave you out of this. That every carbon fuel is and fossil fuel is attacked for not being very good stewards of the environment. And I would argue that and ask your thoughts on it as well. That what I see in our district is the people that live there, raise their families there, mine coal, breathe the air, drink the water, fish, hunt, and like I said, raise their families there, are the most wonderful stewards of that land, that community. Do you see anything different?
I don't. I will say that I do work very closely with my colleagues in the anthracite region. And for those of you that don't know, Pennsylvania is the only state in the entire nation that has anthracite coal. So we're kind of a special place for that. As far as the current industry, I think there's a little bit of a misconception that, coal was not regulated on the federal level until 1977. So all of the mining that happened prior to that, everything that was done to support two world wars and provide energy and steel and manufacturing was not regulated. So some of the bad actors of the past that just simply mined the coal and left it there created significant AMD and AML problems in Pennsylvania. We have the largest inventory in the entire nation. However, our current coal operators, so the folks that do produce the coal, pay a percent tonnage into the federal AML fund, and Pennsylvania is the largest recipient of federal dollars for cleaning up our abandoned mine lands. So the folks that operate now, they are required to be fully bonded, including for prevailing wage, which is another thing that I think is interesting for all solar and wind and renewable projects that get AEPS credits, should arguably probably be bonded for prevailing wage for disposal of windmills and solar panels and just bonded in general because they aren't. But we are bonded to the tune of over $1 billion through our state DEP and different outside lenders. But we are seeing an increase in challenges in getting those bonds because of the ESG movement and lenders that are hesitant to provide that to the coal industry. But to your point, everything that I've seen has been fantastic reclamation. At PCA, we give out annual reclamation awards that are graded by DEP on how successful those projects were. And on the federal level, there's awards as well. So I think there's been a turn in the industry since regulation, some 45 years ago.
We're extremely proud, Representative, of our environmental track record. I mean, it's been proven by independent studies that the Pennsylvania natural gas industry is just about the cleanest in the nation and just about the cleanest in the entire world. And you can just look at verified Environmental Protection Agency data from the Department of Environmental Protection as well. The air's never been cleaner in the Commonwealth as well. It's something that we tend to lose sight of when we're constantly barraged by headlines and reports. Remember, it is getting better, and it's the private marketplace that's helping it get better. And the industry is working every single day with different advancements. The industry itself is working very hard with third parties to gather and analyze environmental data, gather and analyze that data, and report that data. I just saw one of our members just last week released the results of continuous monitoring on a well pad, putting it out there for the public to see. We're extremely proud of the record that we've achieved here in Pennsylvania. The economic benefits have been equaled by the environmental benefits.
And I'll also add back to the Infrastructure Reduction Act, there was some funding through Department of Energy for carbon capture projects. And carbon capture, I mean, it's not really there yet, but I think in continuing to invest in those kind of technologies is very important if we're going to continue to use fossil fuels into the future. In addition to that, I do have one member company that has worked with DOE and Nettle, the Nettle Lab out of Pittsburgh, in developing a 300 megawatt coal slurry carbon neutral power plant that's in its final feed study. And that's, investments that happened on the federal level to potentially build that plant, depending on whether or not Pennsylvania or West Virginia is more regulatory friendly. We'll probably decide where the plant goes. But back to just making the investments in technology as well is probably important for our future energy landscape.
Chairman Kell, if I may, just for the benefit of this hearing, I just thought it made sense to let everybody know that we didn't mention heating oil also. Home heating oil, 1 out of every 5 homes in our Commonwealth is heated with heating oil, and there's probably approximately 400 home heating oil companies represented across the Commonwealth, and certainly would benefit from all the comments that were made here today as well. Thank you.
Representative Schlegel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our panel for being here to testify. I appreciate your comments that you have made, and you've used one word that I've noted throughout your testimony today in response to members' questions, and that's the idea of balance. And even talking about that in terms of the environment. And I was just wondering, as you look at balancing all the factors that go into delivering cost-effective energy to the folks here in Pennsylvania, is there an environmental factor that you're being pushed for or people talk about that would put this notion of balance out of whack?
Well, I would just say on a broader scale, by focusing either exclusively on the environmental factors or focusing exclusively on sustainability, you then lose sight of reliability. You lose sight of cost. Mr. Fitzpatrick talked a lot about the grid and its ability to handle increased numbers of renewable sources, intermittent sources. We can't say it enough. We need that balance. It's common sense. It makes great economic and environmental sense as well. It's about sustainability. It's about sustainability of our economy, sustainability of the environment as well.
Representative, if I had to pick out one thing that's a danger in terms of an environmental movement, and I don't think it's a prevailing attitude, but there is some of it here, not as much in Pennsylvania as in other states. It's this attitude of absolutism. It's the attitude of we don't want to gradually move to reduce our emissions. Fossil fuels are evil. We want to stop using them completely now. Oh, and by the way, we shouldn't invest in them at all either. That is where I see the danger coming in, that sort of all or nothing type of approach, which it isn't realistic. It will lead to energy shortages down the road, I believe, if we follow that path. And I do have a concern that some of the stigma that some folks are putting on fossil fuels is a drag on investment in the long term. And I think that is a danger that I think I see and I think others see as well.
Thank you very much for those common sense responses. I appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Kiefer.
Thank you. I'll make this pretty quick. Just following up on Representative Ledbetter's question regarding permitting. In comparison to other states, how do you see Pennsylvania for those that operate in other states as far as production, Pennsylvania and permitting?
I can say that having having companies that have operations in other states like West Virginia and Ohio, Pennsylvania lags behind on the efficiency of the permitting timeline.
Okay. Do you know, like, approximately time-wise? Like, let's just say, on average in Ohio, it takes you maybe, I don't know, 2 years to get a permit versus Pennsylvania, you can be looking at 4 or 5 years or?
I don't. I could ask and get back to you. I will say that I think most of it's very site-specific when you're looking at like a surface mine versus an underground mine versus a longwall versus a room and pillar. So there's a lot of different geological considerations to take into account. But I do know that our neighbors are a lot quicker.
Okay.
I would just concur with Rachel's comments that we see a significant difference from our operators in Ohio and West Virginia. They report back to us that it's much easier in Texas and Louisiana, and recall that's where the capital is going as well. We're in a competition for capital. We could certainly come back with some more information on what those numbers exactly look like, but we'd also have to keep in mind that those permits are for different activities as well. It might not be an apples-to-apples comparison, but just know that those other states are heads and shoulders above us when it comes to processing permits, providing that predictability and consistency.
And that, I was just going to get onto that, the predictability and consistency, right? So I get that we have different topography here, and it's, geographics are different, but there should be a process that's predictable and that is consistent. And then you said, I forget what the term was you used, but basically completeness, right? So you sit and wait for a month, and then they say, oh, well, we haven't done anything because you missed X, Y, Z. Even if you might be doing an identical application that you've done the same way, there's something new. So we've had discussions, we have legislation that would just say, hey, let's treat this like Amazon and a package, right? When you put it into the system and you're putting a permit in, there should be something there that's, you can't even click the submit button because, right, there's a red asterisk somewhere. You have to, provide additional information. There should be some of that that's there just for, the fundamental information that they're collecting.
I will say on a positive note that there has been an evolution of e-permitting with DEP, and we do have a couple applications that allow for electronic submittal. And I did see this year one permit turn around in record time. So I don't know if the electronic submittal and maneuvering towards that will improve everything. I don't think it's possible for some of the more complicated permits at this point, but I have seen a more positive turnaround in very limited, but some scenarios.
Right, just for the general intake, it would, it would be a win-win for you and the workers that they claim they don't have enough of if they could get some of this preliminary stuff done. So thank you all for your time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative. And as much as we've heard on permitting, we are going to do a hearing just on opportunity loss because of Pennsylvania's permitting at some point this session. Representative Kephart.
Thank you, Chairman. So I wasn't going to go down this path today, but I was sort of thinking of it, and then Rachel sort of opened the door to reclamation work and so forth. So I want to go down 2 avenues with this for you, Ms. Gleason. So I heard some talk today of environmental concerns and carbon emissions, and I know a lot of people argue that we need the green energy because of environmental concerns. However, you brought up the reclamation work. In my district, in area, Clearfield and Cambria County, we probably have some of the most abandoned mines in the state or country, therefore, and a lot of operators in my district are telling me that they can't get these permits right now for reclamation work. It's becoming tougher. Multiple ones have told me that. Is it not environmentally friendly to clean up these abandoned mines that have acid mine drainage at the same time increasing energy supply?
It is. I think there's 2 different buckets there. When you have your legacy sites that are pre-1977, so any AMD or AML issue that's pre-1997 is eligible for federal funding, and then any reclamation on a site that's post-77 is not eligible for that funding. So there was a significant, the Jobs Reduction Act, or I might be getting that name wrong, had a significant amount of money in it. And Pennsylvania is going to be receiving, I think, $32 million a year for the next 15 years for reclamation, but only for projects that are pre-1977. Now, there's different types of reclamation where, there's AMD issues where you address a discharge into a stream, and then there's reclamation that occurs and you get waste coal as a result. But I would concur that it is environmental friendly to continue to, reclaim and remediate and address the waste coal issues. But there's two different buckets of money, which makes it a little bit complicated. And I will add the pre-1977 money and the new money that's coming into Pennsylvania, you have to be a nonprofit to apply for it. So that's the other problem, that any operator would have to go through their conservation district or a watershed group or a municipality to access that money. They wouldn't be able to do it directly.
Yeah, and additionally, I have it's not a cogen plant, but it's an independent power plant on the literal line of my district in Cambria County. And, they process a lot of waste coal through their coal refuse in the area. And, and it's quite amazing to see they feed right into the power generation step. I was there this summer visiting them. And we said about earlier at night that the generation is as much, and they were saying about they lower it then and stuff. It's pretty amazing to see what goes on there. And I'm just thinking to myself on there, look at all the, positive cleanups that they've done, but also plugging right into the energy grid. I just don't know how that's not a positive for, Pennsylvania and the country, really. So thank you for being here today.
Mr. Fitzpatrick, real quickly, I'd like to ask just one question of the panel. You had mentioned throughout this testimony today that the key for energy prices, the key for energy production is extraction and more production in Pennsylvania. Energy generation is more production in Pennsylvania. We have resources here for production. I'd like to ask Ms. Gleason and Mr. Callahan, permitting is something that we've talked about. We've talked about in almost every hearing. We get it, understand the lack of stability, the lack of timeliness, and how that impacts growth and production. But you also mentioned, Mr. Callahan, the potential of LNG, more pipelines. That's going to require more production. What can we do to remove obstacles to production in Pennsylvania for both coal and the natural gas industry? Other than permitting. We know permitting is there, but anything else? Go ahead.
Sure. Well, I would just say one thing about we need pipelines to facilitate more production, and the lack of pipelines is holding back production. The lack of pipelines and infrastructure is holding back the ability to really do something more about prices. We've all talked about we need to increase that supply. We need to provide that precise operating environment, predictable operating environment. I'm not going to say permitting, but we need to look at all the things that the industry goes through to develop natural gas, to transport natural gas, to get it to market, and see where those hurdles and impediments are. Some of those hurdles and impediments are at the far end of the spectrum in terms of efforts to ban natural gas hookups. Some of them are at the far end of the production area, where people are trying to limit access to supplies. We need to look at all of those examples.
In the coal space, we've been around a little bit longer. Not me personally, but the industry has. And, we've contracted a lot. So, at this point, I don't know if there's going to be a lot of an increase in production. It goes back to the markets, it goes back to demands, it goes back to where it's needed. We do have, one of my member companies has an export terminal out of Baltimore that they have exclusivity with. So they would see when things like when Russia and Ukraine are at war, and when Germany's turning their coal plants back on and England's turning their coal plants back on, you see an increase in exports. But as far as, it does go back to permitting, planning, and demand. If RGGI were to go into effect in Pennsylvania, it's more than likely that our 3 left massive coal-fired generation would shut down. That said, there's West Virginia's generation portfolio is about 90% coal. So it's not limited to our borders, but it has to do with, federal and national policies.
Thank you very much, panel. I think just from this panel, we probably have ideas now for about 4 or 5 more policy hearings. So we'll be in touch. We appreciate it. Thank you. All right. Our next panel is the impact of energy prices on consumers. Our first testifier will be virtual, Rob Williamson, the Executive Director of Industry Energy Consumers of Pennsylvania, then Kevin Sunday, Director of Government Affairs at the PA Chamber of Business and Industry, Greg Moreland with the Pennsylvania NFIB, he's the Pennsylvania State Director, and Mr. Mike Butler, who is the Mid-Atlantic Executive Director for the Consumer Energy Alliance. We're going to have each of you testify, starting with you, Mr. Williamson, online. And if we could keep your testimony to 3 to 5 minutes, and then we'll have questions, and we'll go from there. Mr. Williamson, the floor is yours.
All right, great. Thank you, Chairman Kale and members of the committee. I appreciate the opportunity to participate on this panel virtually this morning. Just as a little bit of a real quick way of background so that you know kind of who I represent, the Industrial Energy Consumers of Pennsylvania, otherwise known as IECPA. It's a trade association that was formed in 1982 by large energy-intensive customers with one or more facilities in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. IECPA regularly monitors the Public Utility Commission activities, participates in the PUC regulatory process, and participates in the legislative process at the General Assembly on matters impacting large energy users. Our members spend over $300 million a year on energy, consume over 3 billion kilowatt hours of electricity, and over 30 BCF of natural gas, and that's just at Pennsylvania facilities. Our members recognize the need to act on climate change, and many of our member companies are implementing their own individual sustainability programs. But at the same time, as we've heard from those on the supplier panel, we need reliable energy that is priced in a way that allows our Pennsylvania operations to grow and successfully compete in a global markets that we serve. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I believe I have the capability to do that here. And we'll expand this just so that I can kind of step through some of the information that's in the testimony that I provided. Hopefully everyone has a copy of that as well. But there's just four main areas that I want to touch on quickly with you this morning. One, IECPA supports the electricity competitive retail choice market structure in Pennsylvania. Now, Ms. Gleason did a great job of explaining that market structure, so I'm not going to spend much time going through that. But electricity costs are 30% to 70% of an industrial manufacturer's cost, and that just provides self-motivation to reduce both usage and cost. Just to put that in perspective, for an IECPA member, a large energy user, 1 cent per kilowatt hour increase in electricity costs can result in over $10 million per year in that increase in cost. Now, we've heard, in discussing this market today, that prices in this electricity retail choice market can change with the supply and demand in that market. However, that market provides competition amongst those generation suppliers to control cost. Retail choice also provides greater flexibility for customers to lock in their price for time periods that are best for them. We have industrial companies that lock their price in for a year, 3 years, even up to 5 years forward to help provide that budget certainty for them. So we support that market structure and encourage the policymakers to continue to put policies in place that strengthen that competitive marketplace. Now, that market run by PJM is not perfect, but it has a lot of great benefits. However, non-market mandated policy and regulatory initiatives like renewable portfolios, or as we call it in Pennsylvania, the alternative energy standard requirements, energy efficiency requirements, restrictions on what fuel can be used, and things like the regional greenhouse gas programs have and will significantly increase cost to electricity customers. And I'll talk about a couple of those here in a minute. But because this is a hearing looking at energy prices, I want to first just touch on natural gas. Natural gas is a critical fuel source and a raw material for industrial manufacturing customers. Again, similar to electricity, a $1 per MMBTU increase in natural gas can result in over $10 million per year increase in cost to a manufacturing company. Pennsylvania's natural gas supply has helped provide a competitive advantage to industrial manufacturing customers. In fact, the natural gas market across the U.S. has helped provide a manufacturing resurgence in the U.S. I provided this graph here that looks over the last 10 years of Henry Hub natural gas pricing, and this is in dollars per MMBTU. Henry Hub is a very active trading location in Louisiana for natural gas. And you can see the evolution of the market here back starting in early 2000. Demand started to outstrip supply. We started to see some extreme spikes. We started to see natural gas prices increases, but the market worked. The market drove innovation. It drove new technology that allowed us to tap into new reserves of natural gas that were trapped in these shale plays, and now allowed us to diversify the supply of that natural gas and not just be reliant upon the gas coming out of the Gulf of Mexico. Yes, we've seen an increase here over the past year with the uncertainty of the war in Ukraine and the availability of energy supply in Europe. We saw all of the liquefied natural gas facilities in the U.S. ramp up to full output. That increased some demand. But now we're seeing that market respond, and we're seeing those prices come back down. In fact, I think somebody mentioned it, but when I pulled up the Henry Hub prices as of today, between now and June of this year, pardon me, natural gas prices are back under $3 an MMBTU, and for the balance of the year are in the $3 per MMBTU range. So we're seeing that supply and demand dynamic work in the market. Next item, non-market mandated charges like the Act 129 Energy Efficiency Program. There were some questions about this earlier, are adding uncompetitive cost to industrial manufacturing customers. Since the beginning of the E&C program in June of 2009, and there's been different phases of this program. We're currently in phase 4, which runs from June of 2021 through May 31st of 2026. But that program has it's resulted in more than $2 billion of customers have paid into that program, and that includes over $1 billion in program overhead. When you look at those charges, they're significant for industrial customers, and they add to the electric distribution utility bill for manufacturing customers, industrial customers. As much as up to 43% of the utility bill can be linked to these Act 129 charges. The Act 129 investment by industrial manufacturing business has largely gone without a return to those entities that are unable to participate in that utility E&C offerings, since they've already invested in their own operational improvements to be as efficient as possible and remain competitive. Because these manufacturing businesses are exposed to global trade, they can't merely pass on additional costs to their customers without risking the loss of those customers, that global competition. Unlike other energy generation resources, energy efficiency has a direct operational benefit to the individual customer that's implementing that energy efficiency. State policy should not require a manufacturing customer to subsidize and pay for energy efficiency projects at other manufacturing facilities, which may be owned by their direct competitors. Energy-intensive manufacturers started energy efficiency long before Act 129 in 2008, and they continue to self-invest in that energy efficiency. provided a chart here which looks at the energy, the BTU usage per dollar of gross output. And you can see since 2000, well before 2008, the industrial companies have invested in energy efficiency and continued to drive down that energy usage per dollar of gross output. So conditions have changed significantly since Act 129 type programs were enacted by several states. Since then, these programs have been modified in at least 29 states, including Pennsylvania's neighboring states, to provide an opt-out or some type of self-directed program for large manufacturing customers. It's long past time to do the same in Pennsylvania. This is an area where we have an opportunity to help reduce the cost to these large energy users that are already dedicated and focused on energy efficiency. And finally, the RGGI program will create a significant electricity cost increase to customers. At the current carbon allowance price of $13 a ton, electricity market prices in PA could increase over $6 a megawatt hour. What does that mean? Put that in perspective for us, Rod. What does $6 a megawatt hour mean? Well, here's the table for residential customers, commercial customers, industrial customers. We're talking about an electricity cost increase close to $1 billion a year associated with a $6 per megawatt hour increase. On top of that, not only does the electricity cost increase, but then they have to pay more in the gross receipts tax increase. So add that all up. Like I said, total annual increases, significant. Not only would this electricity cost increase have a significant direct impact on industrial manufacturing companies' energy bills, it would also significantly raise costs to these companies' employees, resulting in further inflationary pressure. IACPA's issue is not with the underlying goals of reducing carbon emissions, but rather the unnecessary RGGI cost that would be imposed on electric generators in Pennsylvania that will increase the cost of electricity to Pennsylvania residents, commercial businesses, energy-intensive, trade-exposed industrial manufacturers. That increased cost is unnecessary because energy-related carbon dioxide emissions in Pennsylvania have decreased just as much on a percentage basis as other states participating in RGGI and have decreased more than other RGGI states on an absolute basis without the added cost of the RGGI program. This has occurred in large part because of that competitive retail choice market in Pennsylvania driving the development of lower carbon emitting generation. So you can see in this table, I've gone back to the beginning of kind of that RGGI program through 2020, which is the most recent year of the data. The average of the RGGI states have reduced their energy intensive carbon by 32.4%. Look at Pennsylvania. We've reduced it 39.7%. Look at the absolute basis. We're well above any other of the RGGI states when it comes to that carbon reduction within that energy marketplace. There was also a question earlier about how does Pennsylvania electricity prices compare to the other RGGI states. I've looked at it from the industrial customer perspective. Pennsylvania has lower industrial electricity rates than every other RGGI state other than New York, and New York has some special circumstances where they've got access to some lower cost hydro generation. Finally, I want to circle back on the natural gas side, and the issue there becomes when we start to look at banning the use of that natural gas. It's a dangerous policy. It's a slippery slope. Okay, we ban the use by residential customers. What's next? Do we ban the schools using it for heating? Do we ban hospital use? Industrial customers don't have an option for another fuel source for the use, many of the uses that they have for natural gas for process heating. So in summary, market competition drives innovation and at lower energy pricing. Legislation and regulations should not impose unnecessary additional requirements that force a transition to occur faster than the market can react. And that's what programs like RGGI do. They will force coal-fired generation to retire faster than the market can react or what the market would call for. Such action only results in higher cost and decreased reliability. I thank you for providing IAC with the opportunity to offer input on this critical issue.
Thank you. Mr. Sunday.
Good morning. Thank you, Chairman Kale, members of the committee and staff for this hearing this morning. I appreciate the opportunity to speak alongside many distinguished panelists. My name is Kevin Sunday, Director of Government Affairs with the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry. We're the largest broad-based business advocacy organization in the Commonwealth, representing nearly 10,000 members of all sizes, commercial and industrial sectors. This state's abundant natural resources have led our country through every major energy transition over the past 165 years, from the first oil well drilled in Titusville in 1859, the first delivery of natural gas to a major city in Pittsburgh in 1884, the first commercial nuclear plant in Shippingport in 1958, to today's prolific production of shale gas and many exciting innovations in advanced manufacturing and distributed energy resources. We're the nation's largest exporter of gas and electricity, the second largest exporter of coal to international markets, and the second largest producer of electricity from nuclear power. We're home to universities who are producing globally recognized engineering talent and trade schools who train and develop highly in-demand technical talent. We're the host to PGM, which is the grid operator for the largest organized grid in the world that delivers power to 65 million Americans across 13 states. We're also home to several of the last refineries in the Northeast United States. And we're also proud to count among our membership companies who are leading on advanced manufacturing, robotics, renewables, distributed power, electrified heavy trucking, carbon capture, and hydrogen. Our state's energy resources have helped dramatically improve our nation's energy security as well as that of our allies while significantly reducing emissions. Among all states, we are second only behind Ohio, also a competitive electricity market, in reducing greenhouse gas emissions since 2005. And as a state, we are, for the first time in decades, monitoring attainment for all federal standards with the exception of one statewide. And in short, we've had tremendous success and have the opportunity to lead well into the 21st century, provided we deal with regressive policy, inflation, and the high cost of capital at a time when the world is increasingly hungry for American energy. We need pro-growth policy at the state and federal level to encourage investment. Because high energy prices will impact everything from the manufacturing sector to the operations of schools and healthcare systems, and they are especially regressive to low-income families. Restricted fossil fuel production also impacts the manufacture of fertilizer and ammonia, which threatens global food insecurity, as the United Nations recently noted. Recent price spikes are in large part owing to disruptions in international energy markets arising from Russia's horrific invasion of Ukraine, as well as significant disruptions from the pandemic and mitigation measures. These extraordinarily high energy prices we've seen here in the United States are a fraction of what is going on in Europe, where manufacturers are facing costs 10 and 20 times what we are seeing here. In fact, major producers of important products, from chemicals to steel to fertilizer in Europe, are announcing they are suspending production and moving operations out of the continent entirely. Some are looking to expand operations here in the United States. Some may go elsewhere. But if we take steps to welcome increased investment into our state and country through energy resources, while at the same time increasing delivery of energy to our allies abroad, it should be a win for everybody. As noted, upcoming forecasts are showing the gas market and electricity prices are going to come down. That's a result of more investment into production. But getting those energy prices down is just one piece of the puzzle. As discussed, permitting delays will impact the ability of a financial institution to close out a loan, and the overall dysfunction of our infrastructure and permitting system is leading to underinvestment into important resources needed to power a modern economy. That's one of the reasons we applauded Governor Shapiro for his executive order to streamline permitting. We also championed and applauded the enactment of federal infrastructure legislation, which not only would deliver billions of investment to Pennsylvania for things like broadband and water and upgraded airports, it also, and maybe most importantly, codified some significant regulatory reforms that were put in place by President Trump, So in this time of high polarization, we have a bill that came out of a Democratic House and Senate signed by President Biden that's maybe most impactful policy was reforms to the National Environmental Policy Act that were instituted by President Trump. These delays, these permitting delays, cost our nation about, according to one estimate from a nonpartisan think tank, more than $1 trillion a year in lost economic and public health benefits. So all that to say, let's improve the tax and regulatory reform in this state. Recent events, I'll close on this. A lot of discussion about what happened on December. Let's not lose sight of the fact that the lights stayed on. Pennsylvania throughout, even as demand was very high, was exporting to other states. The grid needs our units. They would need them today. They need them well into the future. And that's incumbent upon legislators to put in good policy that protects our interests and advances the interests of our country. Thank you for the opportunity. Go Eagles.
Mr. Moreland.
Thank you, Chairman Kale and members of the committee. I'm Greg Moreland. I'm the Pennsylvania State Director for NFIB, National Federation of Independent Business, representing about 13,000 small and independent businesses all throughout the Commonwealth and in all different sectors. I think it's important before we get into talking about energy prices to understand the complexity and issues that small business have been facing over the last 3 years, right? So 3 years ago, small businesses, many of them were deemed non-essential. They were shut down. The government told them that they could not open, could not operate, yet those bills for energy for their brick and mortar shops remained still coming in. 3 years later, many small businesses never made up the losses that they incurred. They're now facing extreme labor shortages, supply chain disruptions, continually high inflation, increased energy costs, increased labor costs, and higher unemployment and insurance tax bills. This has all led to pessimist opinions about the future, right? So NFIB puts out a small business economic trends report about once every month. And last December in 2022, business optimism continued to be below average for the 12th consecutive month. And 32% of owners reported that inflation was the single most important problem in operating their business. And why I mention this is that there are a multitude of problems that are facing small business. It is not simply one thing. It's not simply just inflation of one particular item. There are a multitude of reasons behind why our small businesses are struggling today. And so, I remember several years ago as a staffer inside this building working on a legislative package that was championed by then Speaker of the House, Mike Turzai. Many of you sitting in front of me today had a part in that package. And that was a pro-growth, pro-jobs package of bills aimed at harnessing the powers that Pennsylvania has and the resources that we have to drive our Commonwealth forward. I don't think it's any surprise to the members sitting in front of us today that, we haven't reached our full potential, even though we've had numerous proposals out there to embrace and utilize our natural resources. We have not fully gotten there yet. So with that said, NFIB is agnostic to any one energy source. We are not pro-natural gas or anti-solar wind. We believe that there are benefits to a variety of energy sources. NFIB also believes that no local municipal government should be able to restrict any type of energy. And NFIB was extremely supportive of House Bill 1947 by Representative Tim O'Neill from the prior session for this reason. Prohibiting or restricting a utility service based upon the type of energy source is poor public policy because it restricts competition and impedes upon the free market, forcing residents and businesses to spend significant sums of money to power their home and restaurant. What our members care about are energy sources that are reliable, effective, clean, and cheap because it directly affects their ability to survive as a business. NFIB members also believe that in personal choice of freedoms. In Pennsylvania, you can choose the company that generates your home or business's electricity. This means that if you have the power to choose to switch to a competing supplier that can offer the lowest price, best price, or provide a specific service that you want. NFIB would oppose any legislative infringement to energy choice. And you'll see in my written testimony for the members that NFIB recently conducted an energy survey with some of our members to better understand the pinch points and what is occurring on the ground level, right? What are some things that are small businesses are having to do to offset all of these rising costs, right? So what we found is that members are adding, fuel surcharges onto bills. They're keeping temperatures in their brick and mortar businesses many degrees lower than they previously had. We had a doctor in the Lehigh Valley that says, I'm a small medical practice, subscription-based, called direct primary care. I operate on a small margin and do not want to have to pass these costs on to my patients, since the goal of my practice model is to provide affordable primary care medical services. The higher cost of energy is also being seen in my vendors. We had a diner and bar say, my natural gas has doubled since a year ago. I've had to keep temperatures turned down. Electricity is high, but there's not much I can do about that. I have to keep the lights on, the beer coolers running, and the freezers running. I closed my diner in late 2022 due to a lack of help. So I thought the bills would go down without the bar being open. And she said they really didn't go down all that much. In conclusion, energy affects every single thing that we do. Right? There's not one thing in this room that was created without the use of energy, whether it be in production or transportation. Small businesses need to know when they flip on the light switch in the morning that the lights will come on. They need to know that in the coldest days of winter, their energy source will continuously power their food freezers so they don't lose out on thousands of dollars of inventory. Small businesses rely on consistency, clarity, and certainty. This includes having smart energy policies. Energy Choice in Pennsylvania has allowed consumers to shop for providers, foster competition to keep rates low. In recent years, though, the energy industry has come under attack as polluters and price gougers. Energy companies will not invest in the Commonwealth if the policies and the rhetoric from the government are hostile. We have the opportunity here in Pennsylvania for a renaissance of American manufacturing, bringing businesses back from overseas and attracting new businesses from out of state to come here to Pennsylvania. But to do so, we need smart policies that encourage growth and promote competition. Thank you very much.
Mr. Butler.
Thank you, Chairman Kale, members of the committee, for having me here today. I'd like to start by echoing what Greg's member said. We need to affordably and reliably keep beer coolers cold. Critically important. Here at the Consumer Energy Alliance, we bring together consumers, producers, and manufacturers to engage in meaningful dialogue about America's energy future. Founded in 2006, Consumer Energy Alliance is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization representing virtually every sector of the American economy, from the iron and steel industry to truckers, airlines, agriculture, labor unions, restaurants, chemical manufacturers, small businesses, and families across the nation. We have over 500,000 members in the United States and over 3,000 here in Pennsylvania, all of whom support and want a rational, all-of-the-above energy policy that utilizes all of our domestic natural resources, both traditional and renewable, while ensuring continued progress in protecting our shared environment. Unfortunately, across the country and increasingly here in Pennsylvania, we are witnessing irresponsible policies and proposals that have the unfortunate consequences of increasing prices and harming reliability while failing to achieve any meaningful environmental goals. The genesis of many of these policy proposals originated out of Congress with the Green New Deal, and they unfortunately ignore the remarkable progress our country and Pennsylvania have made, in large part due to the record production and use of natural gas, in addition to the renewable deployment in reducing emissions. For 2 decades now, the United States has been the global leader in emissions reduction. That needs to be taken into account. These harmful policies will lead to higher energy bills, significant service disruptions, and increased income inequality, while doing little to achieve the environmental progress we are concurrently already experiencing. We need to look only at similar policies enacted in Germany and the UK to see how disastrous they can be. They've increased energy costs as much as 300% and have made energy scarcer, which in a crisis, a peak cold winter, hot summer, can be extremely dangerous, even lethal. To be clear and reiterate, Consumer Energy Alliance, we support actions that thoughtfully advance our nation toward a cleaner, more environmentally responsible energy future. We believe that responsible policies always consider the needs of consumers while leveraging and supporting the development of state-of-the-art technologies to improve environmental stewardship, aiding the continued reductions of all emissions. However, well-intentioned but misguided attempts at environmental stewardship lead to astronomical costs and jeopardize energy resources that are helping our nations reduce those harmful emissions. I won't bore you with a lot of numbers, but a few facts and figures to put some of this into context. We've recently seen some utilities raise their electric costs by as much as 31% in Pennsylvania. 2/3 of Pennsylvania households use natural gas as their primary home heating fuel. The annual total energy expenditure per capita for a Pennsylvania family is $2,890. If you consider that more than 12% of Pennsylvanians live at or below the poverty line, based on that average energy expenditure, that means 1.5 million Pennsylvanians are spending nearly a quarter of their annual income on energy expenses. And that plays out nationwide. According to 2020 data, there are 34 million U.S. households that report difficulty paying energy bills or report they have to keep their home at unsafe temperatures because of energy cost concerns. It does not have to be this way. We have the means at our disposal for affordable and reliable energy that keeps costs down for our families and small businesses. I've included in my written testimony the energy burden, which is the percentage of gross household income spent on energy costs by county in Pennsylvania, so you can look at what your what burden your constituents face with these energy bills. But unfortunately, and I don't need to tell members of this committee, you have colleagues that want to continue to push even more aggressive anti-energy policies. And I would point you next door to New Jersey. There's underway with the Energy Master Plan that after 4 years finally came back with a price tag. It's $1.4 trillion. Imagine what the cost of implementing the same policies would be here in Pennsylvania. A key question the public should be asking of its policymakers and legislatures is why are we making it harder for regular people, small businesses, farmers, and industries who are just now getting back to work after the COVID situation to save on their energy costs? We all want to benefit from the diversity of our energy resources. We understand there will be more renewable energy sources utilized, but that evidence shows that political goals designed to please a small vocal minority are disconnected from reality. Energy is a fundamental right, and Pennsylvania, of all places, as the nation's second largest provider of energy to other states behind only Texas, according to the Energy Information Administration, should lead the way to advance a legislative and regulatory agenda that recognizes that. Anything else would be an energy injustice. We stand ready to work with the legislature in pursuit of smart, realistic policies that keep our needs in front of us and keeps abundant, affordable energy available and will continue to push forward our environmental progress. We recognize that Pennsylvania's energy can achieve both a better economy and a better environment for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Butler. Mr. Butler and the testifiers in general have mentioned a lot about the renewable energy industry and the unreliability of it and the cost of it. And it's unfortunate that there is such a drive towards it, being that it's really, for the most part, Chinese-produced energy at this point in time that isn't as reliable. But there's new technology coming out, and that will be explored, and it'll be, as we go forward, it'll be interesting to see how it can compete with Pennsylvania-produced energy. I guess my question to this panel is, there's been discussion about increasing in the alternative energy portfolio the renewable usage to 30%. How would that impact reliability? How would that impact costs for your members?
I appreciate the question, Chairman. I think one is going to depend on what is considered in that 30% bucket. Right now, the legislature's left in place legislation that's 2 decades old that said 18% of the mix has to come from a mix of sources. We've maxed out at that 18%. We're meeting the goals by and large. But of that 18%, maybe 4 or 5% is wind and solar. A little bit more is hydro. A lot of it's coming from landfill gas, pulp and paper, et cetera. So it's going to depend on what gets considered in there. The National Electric Reliability Corporation, which is the federal body that makes the grids, have processes in place to make sure they're meeting demand, has said that the #1 challenge to reliability is the pace of the energy transition. In short, too many intermittent resources are coming on. And there's not a market structure that's rewarding both baseload power that's always there, as well as dispatchable power, whether that's gas or batteries that can come on when it's needed. And so if you don't have a pricing structure in place that makes sure the power can be there when wind and solar is not, you're going to have challenge. But you probably are going to see cost increases associated with that backup power as well as transmission. The other thing I'd say is, Congress just passed a lot of funding for these resources. So I think it would behoove all of us to maybe take a step back, get a handle on the costs and where the pace of deployments are before we push more things at the state level.
I would just echo what Kevin said. I mean, the devil will be in the details. But in general, if that push is really to try to really significantly jack up, particularly wind and solar, it would lead to significant cost increases and disruption and reliability.
Yeah, this is Rod Williamson. I'll add any consideration of or review or changes to that alternative energy standard, and just the name alone, alternative energy standard. Right now, it's not considering or taking advantage of all of the alternatives that we have. So, for instance, combined heat and power, very efficient, one of the most efficient forms of generating electricity that's used by industrial customers. Within the AES Tier 2, that's capped at 5 megawatts. There's a limit. Why are we limiting the size of that CHP that can qualify under that AES program? Waste heat recovery. A lot of industrial companies have the ability to capture that waste heat and produce processed steam and offset the use of natural gas. Doesn't even qualify. It's not part of that program. So I do think that there's opportunities if that program were to be revisited, but to just increase the cap and say this is only applies to renewable energy would be a mistake.
Mr. Chairman, I would say from NFIB's perspective, increasing that 18% to 30 is in our view, it's simply more government putting their finger on the scale. Like I said in our testimony, our members want consistency, clarity, certainty. They want reliable, effective, clean, and cheap power. I don't know how increasing alternative energies to 30% in that portfolio would match up with the views of our members, and simply say that oftentimes the government feels like they are helping, but many times that is to the detriment of small business owners.
Thank you. It almost seems like what we ought to be doing is, we have a process in Harrisburg where we put fiscal notes on bills and what it will cost the Commonwealth in order to pass a certain piece of legislation. We ought to be requiring the PUC or some agency to put a fiscal note on what it's going to cost ratepayers for the policies that we're putting in. You all and your members suffer the consequence of our actions. We ought to know what the type of increase in charging it will be. Representative Coffer.
Thank you, Chairman. First of all, I want to, Mr. Moreland, as I always get you, I'd like to thank you for your service, but more importantly, congratulations on your recent engagement. Very happy for you, my friend. Very excited for you and the steps ahead. But my question is for you in regard to, what we see with rising energy prices. You alluded to this in your testimony. Obviously, our smaller businesses, obviously NFIB being the voice of small business, our consumers are going to start seeing this. These prices are going to be passed on. I'm very concerned about transitory inflation happening right now, that we're going to see rising costs, even though we see some deflationary measures going on right now. But I'm afraid of it being short-term, as consumer pricing is going to continue here, and disposable incomes are going to shrink as the cost of goods around from energy and other things are going to continue. Can you just, provide a little more insight? Obviously, you talked about a doctor, you talked about a few others. I mean, what's it actually mean for these small businesses who are already struggling coming out of this pandemic, who weren't treated fairly along with other businesses? Can you just provide some thoughts on that?
I would say, and that's a great question, Representative. Thank you. Small businesses don't have the economies of scale that many large, multinational corporations may have, right? They can't absorb drastic changes in pricing, whether it be the supplies that are coming in, the heat that they're using to, warm their facilities. They don't have the economies of scale to simply say, oh, we're just going to eat that cost, or we're going to roll it all the way downhill to the consumer. And that's what they've been left with doing recently is rolling all of their costs down to the consumer. Well, I think we've all noticed over the last year that inflation has been pretty high, right? It's been about 40-year high. And so what our members are saying is inflation and the input costs and energy costs are one of those costs that they've seen skyrocketing, right? They can only roll that down to the consumer so much. before they start changing the consumer behavior, right? What is a price of a cup of coffee worth to you? Is it $3, $4, $5? Where is that tipping point, right? When people say, you know what, I usually stop at this small business every morning on my way into work. I get a breakfast sandwich and a cup of coffee, and I head into work. Well, you know, it's getting more expensive every single time I go, so maybe I'll change my behavior and not go there. Well, then we're not supporting the small businesses, ultimately driving the nail into the coffin even more for that small business owner. So.
Thank you, and I just want to balance that too, and I hope it's okay. I wanted to quickly ask Rod Williamson, I think you're still, hopefully you can still hear us, because I know you testified, I think you said it was $1 per MMBTU that can lead to a $10 million a year cost increase for some people on the higher end of things. So, you know, hearing it from the small businesses and obviously then to the larger industrial users, and I want to couch this a little bit because I was the one that asked the question before about Act 129 and trying to get some of those programs in to our industrial users. And I see that being a problem that we have, that, you know, talking about mechanical insulation or things being able to help our industrial users be able to have better access to some of these Act 129 programs. I know you're saying, hey, it's time to change them entirely, but I think getting some of the industrial users more access to some of these programs to be used efficiently to help drive down some of your energy prices and being able to actually use more of the dollars that you guys are paying into. So could you comment a little bit on how it affects the larger businesses a little bit deeper, as well as how if we were to tweak some of these Act 129 programs, that they might be able to benefit you as well?
Yeah, you know, first and foremost, you know, the IECPA members are definitely not opposed to energy efficiency. You know, one of the most cost-effective uses of energy is the megawatt or the BTU that you don't use. The problem is for these energy intensive manufacturers where that cost is so significant that we just talked about. They've captured all of the low hanging energy efficiency projects. And therefore, in order for them to make further efficiency reduction, it requires a significant process change. And so let's put this in perspective to like a residential customer, right? So you go out and you purchase these appliances for your home. And so you've got a refrigerator and a stove and even your automobile. And yes, you can make changes to your home. You can change, you know, how you use those or cycle those, or you can make some improvements to seal your home. But at some point, once you capture all that, you have to make a process change, which means you need to invest capital and upgrade the equipment that you have. For these manufacturing customers, that process change, that upgrade is significantly expensive. And any grant that they would get from the Act 129 Energy Efficiency Program is only 1% to 5% of that capital cost. That program is not driving the energy efficiency investment for these large industrial companies, but it's adding cost because there's overhead in the management of those programs by the utilities. And I'll just give you a couple of examples. These are actual examples from IECPA members. One IECPA member company paid $732,000 during phase 3 of the program and received $40,000 in energy efficiency project support at their facility. Another member paid almost $1 million, 900 and some $1,000 in just 2 years, 2017 and 2018, received $154,000 in energy efficiency project savings. Pennsylvania's neighboring states and many other states beyond that have recognized that this lower hanging fruit in energy efficiency has been captured by these customers and have either provided a direct opt-out or a program where they can self-identify that they have an energy efficiency program so that they can avoid these charges and invest those dollars directly into their facilities. That's what we need in Pennsylvania.
Thank you. I appreciate that. The Act 129 update is sort of of interest to me, and I appreciate that insight that you provided. Thank you very much.
Representative Dorsey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, panelists, for your time and expertise. This question, I suppose, is for Kevin, but anyone's certainly welcome to add their thoughts. So energy costs are rising for various reasons, but I wanted to focus on one prospective reason with this question, which is the federal ethanol mandates. And my question is, to what degree is the Biden administration's inability to reform these ethanol blending mandates affecting drivers at the pump, and are we seeing that even trickle down into other areas of the economy?
Thank you, Representative. I appreciate the question. I appreciate members of this committee who were last session who voted for the resolution to urge the Biden administration to act on this issue. The federal ethanol mandates add, by estimation, 30 to 40 cents per gallon to the cost of drivers. I know a lot of you were concerned when Department of Revenue updated the annual oil and gas, the oil company franchise fee, and went up a few cents. So just multiply that by 10 and you're understanding the magnitude of the ethanol mandate. Look, this is an issue that business, labor, sportsmen's, and environmentalist groups say needs reform. And we urged Biden administration to reform it. And instead they came out last fall with ethanol mandates that are the highest ever proposed by EPA, departing from congressional intent, and are well beyond what the market can bear. So that 30 to 40 cents per gallon that motorists pay, it also takes thousands of acres out of food production, out of conservation, out of recreation, raises food prices at the store, and you're going to see more cost increases going forward. So it's frustrating. Maybe it changes if Iowa's not first in the nation primary, but until it does, I mean, all we can do in Harrisburg is raise what the costs are. And again, almost every member of the General Assembly asked the Biden administration to change it, and so far Pierce has fallen on deaf ears. But the last thing I would note, it's jeopardizing the viability long-term of the few refineries that are left in the Northeast United States. If we lose those, we're talking about even greater cost increases to transportation markets, because now we have nowhere in the Northeast to produce this fuel. We're piping it all up, not just crude, but refined product up from the Gulf, in from the Midwest, and that's a challenge. So I appreciate the question. I appreciate the work that this body has done on raising the issue.
Sounds like we need to change our primary day. Representative Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not going to touch on the dates of the primary. I'm sure that's a hearing for a different day. I did want to dig a little bit deeper. Mr. Williamson, you were just answering a series of questions with Rep. Coffer about the 129. In your testimony, you mentioned adding uncompetitive costs, to our energy-intensive manufacturers. Can you touch a little bit on what you refer to? I've seen other reports that up to 36% energy charges to our energy-intensive manufacturers on their bill. Your testimony touched on 43%. So those are additional charges that they're paid, that our manufacturers are paying for energy efficiency programs, but they're only getting a slight portion of that back. So, how does it work in Ohio with their self-directed program?
Yeah, so appreciate the follow-up question on it. So under these, so you're right. What this is, it's a separate cost on the utility bill that's not related to the delivery of the energy. It's to collect the dollars to fund these energy efficiency programs. And depending on the utility and how it's structured, it can be a rather significant portion of the bill that these large companies receive from that utility.
And just jumping in on you there. So we were talking in past hearings about a considerably large chip manufacturer, a multi-mega billion-dollar investment. When companies are looking at states to invest, that would be an energy-intensive operation. And so if they came here to Pennsylvania, they'd be paying those types of numbers more?
Exactly. It's based on their demand. So those companies that use large amounts of electricity that have that higher demand are going to pay significantly into this energy efficiency program. And what the other states have done, states that Pennsylvania is competing for those large energy users, those large employers, have provided either a direct opt-out, which says, okay, if you're an industrial company in this particular category, all you have to do is select to opt out of this program and you're out. You don't get charged. Or at a minimum, they say you have to file or demonstrate that you have this self-directed energy efficiency program, that you're managing this energy efficiency. And all large energy intensive manufacturing companies have these energy efficiency programs. They can't afford not to manage their energy and be energy efficient.
So again, just trying to put this into my small business mindset, if I build off the example of that $700,000 in taxes that are, or surcharges that you were mentioning earlier, if I was to implement a $500,000 energy improvement project, then I wouldn't have to pay the $700,000 in my surcharge because I'm spending $500,000 at my own plant. Is that kind of how that would work or could work?
You're looking at, you're indicating that you have a program in place that is going to achieve the same level of energy efficiency as what the EE&C program as a whole would achieve. So like for phase 4, most of the utilities have plans in place. They'll achieve about a 3% reduction in energy usage. So these industrial companies that want to self-direct would indicate we have a plan in place that's going to achieve that same level of energy efficiency reduction. But now it allows them to make that investment directly into their facilities and not pay into a program where they're only getting a portion of that money back through the program.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate, the flexibility to dig a little bit deeper because it looks like that's something we could really do to help our large energy manufacturers. Thank you.
Administrator DeLozier.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for being here and the information that you're sharing. And the chairman had kind of gone down the path that I had wanted to, which was there's been a lot of conversation with AEPS and the legislation, obviously, and I feel very strongly any legislation, we need to go back and take a look at what is it accomplishing, what do we need to modify, and how do we bring it up to date. And so going down, those caps, the issues, we had that conversation. I guess my follow-up to that is in looking at, with our businesses, they pay the brunt when they get their bill, just like our consumers. But from the perspective of the NFIB and just organizations as a whole, chambers, what states are doing it right? Is there an example out there that you would say follow X? Obviously not California from all of our conversations. But what with dealing with making our portfolio, making it a strong portfolio, making our businesses and those types of things, is there one that we could look at, or pieces of others that come to mind as to what is it that Pennsylvania should be looking towards, since there's a lot of conversation of making changes to this portfolio?
I appreciate the question, Representative. As in a lot of policy issues, North Carolina did something pretty interesting. They did upgrade their alternative energy portfolio, which generally we do oppose mandates, but they took a holistic view. What's the tax structure? What's in place to protect consumers? What's in there to keep manufacturers in this state? And it was really a lot of give and take where Republicans in the legislature, Democratic governor came together and put something together that everyone can get behind. But I think, we can't lose sight of the fact that rather than talk about carving up the pie, we can grow the pie. So last year, Pennsylvania total energy production was the highest on record. That's been a trend the last couple of years. And that's in large part because neighboring states are more reliant on our power because they didn't get that give and take in overall energy policy quite right. And now they turn to us for imported power. So kind of some give and take there, but that's my thoughts.
Yeah, I'll add that Pennsylvania has done things very well when it comes to moving forward with the electricity retail choice marketplace. The legislator policymakers are to be congratulated that you have stuck with that structure within Pennsylvania when many states reversed course on that, because that has allowed, over the years, that has allowed energy costs to come down and be more competitive in Pennsylvania. Yes, there are swings in that market, like we talked about. It's driven by supply and demand, but that market has driven innovation. I personally know of manufacturing businesses that have located or expanded operations in this state because we have an electric choice marketplace, because that gives them control over the mix of energy supply to their facility. You have some companies that want a higher percentage of renewable energy. They can do that. The market allows for that. They want some that want to be able to lock their prices in. They can do that. The danger becomes when we try to put artificial non-market mandates and regulations in place, with RGGI being the foremost concern that industrial customers have on the impact that that is going to have on this market. RGGI, although it is brought forward as an environmental regulation, it will change the energy structure within this state. It will set energy policy within this state.
From NFIB's perspective, I would say that we would echo exactly what Rod and Kevin both said. I think that the retail energy choice, that has allowed our small business members to go out and seek what it is that they're looking for, right? They go out and they have options. It's not being told, this is what you will use, this is the cost of it. If you don't like it, then tough. Rather than point to other states, I would say that we would like the market to be allowed to play out as much as possible, right? NFIB and our members traditionally do not like government sticking their hand in and saying, it has to be this is a mandate, it has to be 30%, and if not, you have to buy these credits and, and spend more money, right? Our members, getting back to the words I used, reliable, cheap, consistent.
Thank you. Any more questions? Representative Dorsey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Rod, you said, and this might turn out as a rhetorical question, but I'm trying to wrap my head around this. Rod, you had, in your opening testimony, just broke down Pennsylvania as a non-RGGI state, and correct me if I'm wrong here, compared to the 11 surrounding RGGI states around us, that we have actually reduced carbon emissions, and maybe this is true. I read another study that suggested this was true, that we've even proportionally lowered our carbon emissions more than all 11 other states combined. So I guess my question is, and it's kind of a rhetorical question, I suppose, but why in the world would we enroll, if the goal of RGGI is to reduce CO2 emissions, why in the world would we enroll in something that seems to be ineffective and secondarily very costly?
We have been asking that exact same question and can't figure out the answer. In fact, and this is some information that hasn't been widely discussed, but when you look at the economic modeling that DEP did around RGGI, they touted and they continued to state that RGGI will lead to a net increase of more than 30,000 jobs and at $1.9 billion in gross state product. In fact, they said that several different times. But there were 3 different economic scenarios that they ran within their economic modeling. It was only one scenario that showed an increase in jobs. The 2 other scenarios, not only did they show a decrease in jobs, they also showed a decrease in the gross state product. And in fact, the scenario that showed increase in jobs showed a decrease as well. And then all three scenarios showed a decrease in disposable personal income. So no matter which scenario you looked at within RGGI, people had less money, disposable income, because the costs were going up. And yet, if the goal is truly carbon reduction, Pennsylvania is already achieving the same level of energy-based carbon reduction as the other states within RGGI, and we're doing it at a much lower cost. We're doing it through a competitive market structure. So we totally agree. Why would we move forward with a program like this?
All right. And I think that's a pretty common theme that we are seeing here today, that for energy issues, for consumers, Pennsylvania has the answer. Harrisburg needs to stay out of the way. And we've always had the answer, and we will continue to have that answer. And I appreciate you guys coming here and testifying on these very critical issues. You know, energy touches everything. Our consumers, our producers, we thank you for being here, for telling us more about what your obstacles are for further opportunity. And we are going to continue to develop this and develop an energy policy that is grounded in reality so that we can enjoy the fruit and the benefits of this natural resource that we have here in Pennsylvania. Our next committee hearing will be next Monday. It'll be here in the Capitol as well. We'll be discussing our heroes in need and uncovering the obstacles our emergency first responders face. Before then, and right now, actually, we'll be having a press conference in the Rotunda, and all are welcome to join us there. If you are planning on attending the meeting next week, please RSVP with my office. To the testifiers, we thank you very much. We'll be in contact with you about future hearings on issues that are critical to this Commonwealth. Until then, this meeting's adjourned.